Though quite cloudy towards eastern parts. Again, any mist and fog will quickly burn back, and then once more another largely fine day for many of us. Just watch out for the potential for some showers to develop over high ground towards northern England, and some of these could be heavy. Temperatures even higher than today for some of us, highs of around 25, possibly 26 Celsius. On Sunday, there's the risk of some showery rain, which could turn heavy, possibly thundery, developing across western parts. Further east, however, it's likely to stay largely dry. Again, plenty of sunshine here, and temperatures could get even higher with highs of 26 or 27.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox, and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say, why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Friday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Lee Anderson's Real World at 7. At 8, it's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of May. Call in the spooks. Keir Starmer has announced he'll rope in MI5 to deal with small boat crossings. Speaking in Dover alongside his new ex-Tory defector MP, the Labour leader said he would ditch the Rwanda plan and launch a new border security command. And cha-ching! Official figures show our short and shallow recession ended last year. Since January, the UK economy is back in the black, with the fastest growth measured in 2 years. But have we really turned a corner? Also this afternoon, the sentencing in the case of the stabbing of beloved accordion-playing charity busker Thomas O'Halloran. He died after being stabbed repeatedly on his mobility scooter in West London 2 years ago. A 46-year-old man has pleaded guilty, but only to manslaughter. Now we're going to be talking about Labour's plan, because they do say they have a plan to stop the boats. It doesn't involve deporting anyone to any third country. It involves cracking down on people smuggling gangs. But just how practical is this? And just how different is it from what the government says they're already doing with their various organisations cracking down on these chains of people smuggling gangs overseas, sometimes as far-flung as not just the Middle East, but the Far East too. This is a global and sprawling problem, and there are some big questions about Labour roping in spooks from MI5 to start to deal with it. They seem to have won over Natalie Elphicke, their new Conservative defector. But is it all as it seems? After all, she once said that Yvette Cooper did not have a plan at all and that the Labour Party was simply an open-door immigration party. Has she changed her tune, or has the Labour Party? I want your views. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in this programme. We'll be getting to those as we analyse what precisely the Labour Party is proposing. All that to come and so much more, including a sit-down interview with the Prime Minister after your headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. It will be supported by around 1,000 additional officers recruited by MI5. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the general election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source, and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream, and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
The UK is no longer in recession, with the latest figures showing the economy performed better than expected. The Office for National Statistics estimates GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. The Chancellor says it shows the government's decisions are paying off. But Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the Tories are out of touch if they're celebrating the data as a win.
If you look at this Prime Minister's record, since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the economy is still £300 worse off per person in the country. So these numbers today are not deserving of the victory lap that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt seem to want to go on.
Now, a judge has denied Donald Trump's request for a mistrial in his hush money case as Stormy Daniels concludes her testimony. The former porn star finished her second day on the stand, where she made explicit allegations of a sexual encounter with the former president. His lawyer unsuccessfully argued for a gag order to be changed so that Trump could respond to her claims. It's the second time this week that a mistrial has been denied. US political analyst Eric Ham says the judge also criticised Trump's lawyer.
And what the judge said was pretty striking. He says that, look, you actually brought this up when you said in your opening that Donald Trump did not have an affair with this woman. So therefore, it was only right for her to go into detail to describe her relationship, to actually paint for the jury that, in fact, this did happen. And he did say that, and he admonished Donald Trump's lawyers that they could have actually objected to many of the things that were said by Stormy Daniels. I do believe that depending on what happens with the verdict, I do believe that we perhaps will see an appeal by Donald Trump's lawyers.
Boeing has suffered a third plane crash in just 2 days. According to reports, 190 people were safely evacuated from an aircraft in Turkey after one of the tyres burst. This comes after a cargo aircraft landed on its nose in Istanbul, as another jet skidded off the runway and caught fire in Senegal. There is no suggestion Boeing are to blame for the crashes, and they are yet to comment on the incidents. Now, Israel's singer has insisted the Eurovision Song Contest in Sweden remains safe for everyone amid protests against her participating. Eden Golan qualified for the final of the Eurovision Song Contest on Saturday, despite being booed throughout the rehearsals and live event. Protesters want Israel banned in the same way Russia was for its involvement in a controversial conflict. Police managed to see off thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators who were surrounding the stadium. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 6 minutes past 12. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has said that people smuggling gangs must be smashed as he unveiled Labour's plans, or at least what he calls plans, to deal with the migration crisis, with proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat smugglers like terrorists. He plans to recruit 1,000 additional officers and spend £75 million on the scheme, equating those costs to those of a year since sending migrants to Rwanda. Well, joining us now is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. And Catherine, Sir Keir Starmer went down to Dover today to announce this, which holds quite heavy political significance.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, Tom. Quite something, this, isn't it? If you told us a week ago that Natalie Elphicke, the very, very right wing within the Conservative Party, MP for Dover, on the front line of the small boats crisis, would be standing here today making a speech praising Keir Starmer, I think most of us, to be honest, wouldn't have believed it. But following her crossing the floor on Wednesday, Sir Keir Starmer began with Natalie Elphicke, now a Labour MP, up until the next election. She's not standing, of course, singing his praises, talking about this plan that Labour have, and saying about Rishi Sunak that under his government, the Conservatives are a byword for incompetence and division. So really quite a turn of events. The Labour Party really parking their tanks very firmly on the Conservative lawn. Of course, Brexit, take back control of our borders. That was supposed to be a critical part. And Rishi Sunak has, stood at so many lecterns with the words "stop the boats" emblazoned upon it. And yet this year, 9,000 people have crossed, despite the pledges to get multiple flights off to Rwanda. So Sir Keir Starmer saying they're going to scrap the Rwanda scheme. Scheduled flights apparently will continue after a general election in which Labour won, but they wouldn't arrange any more flights. That scheme would come to an end. They're putting all their eggs in the basket marked smashing the criminal gangs, basically. Now, this is something the government say they are already working on. It's one strand of many that the government is working on. But of course, all the noise and attention really has been about the Rwanda plan. So Keir Starmer says, forget that. That's not going to work. We're going to put 75 million that we would have saved on not having the Rwanda plan into this big scheme. Border Security Command using MI5, using other agencies, working together, working more closely with the European Union, cracking the gangs at source. Of course, there's nothing simple about this. It's going to be incredibly difficult, whatever government is in power after the next election. But a statement of intent by Labour. And of course, the Conservatives have loved to say always, and indeed are still saying, Labour have no plan. Today, we have a bit of an outline of what, in fact, they would do if and when they come to power.
Really interesting stuff there. I have to say, looking at Sir Keir Starmer speaking there, we were looking at pictures of him just in front of a red background. He could have been anywhere. I mean, if he's going to travel down to Dover, why not do it in front of the white cliffs? Why not do it on a beach and hope a boat arrives in the middle of the speech? There's a lack of imagination there, I should say, from the planners of this event. There he is, just standing in front of a completely blank red screen. My goodness, what a lack of imagination from the Labour organisation team there, Catherine.
Yes, indeed. It wasn't very inspiring, the backdrop, was it? We did have the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. She came on GB News a few hours ago. She was beautifully lit with Dover Castle behind her. You would think they could have found something a little bit more inspiring, but they are hoping that this message that they do have a plan is basically going to make people trust them on this. This is an area, you know, security, border security, that Labour have not really been trusted on. There are plenty of people in the Labour Party that would really like open borders, you know, the extreme left end. But he's very clearly saying, you can trust us to deal with this seriously, no gimmicks from us. Of course, the Conservative Party, James Cleverly.
Yeah, it's a world away from when Sir Keir Starmer stood to be leader of the Labour Party, saying he would promise to defend free movement. Well, now he's precisely promising the opposite. We're going to leave it there, Catherine, for now. Speak to you in a little bit, because we're going to join Mark White now, who has some breaking news for us. Mark, what's happening?
Well, we can confirm that on the very day that Sir Keir Starmer was outlining Labour's policy to stop the boats, another almost 200 Channel migrants crossed the English Channel in 4 small boats. And in fact, just as Sir Keir Starmer was delivering his keynote address, one Border Force vessel arrived in Dover Harbour with 113 migrants on board. So that really gives an indication of the scale of the problem that Sir Keir Starmer will inherit if he becomes the next Prime Minister. And you heard he wants to go down the road there of creating this Border Security Command on the back of course, a rejigging of the whole structure that was announced by the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, just in December of 2022, when he announced a small boats operational command, bringing together pretty much all of the strands that Sir Keir Starmer wants to bring together. But an indication, I think, of just the almighty challenge that any Labour government would have if they get into power is just how organised and how profitable this trade is. This week now, including today's arrivals of just under 200, more than 650 migrants have crossed the Channel. That is almost £2 million that the criminal gangs have made just this week alone. Since the start of the year, we're now at 9,200. Well, that is over £270 million that the criminal gangs have made. So just like the war on drugs, which is very well organised, which is very profitable for the organised criminal groups that are involved in that, the small boats, people smuggling gangs are just as sophisticated, and it is no easy task trying to get after them and trying to dismantle them. They'll have their successes, as they do presently, but whether they can actually get on top of it and completely dismantle the gangs is probably unlikely.
It's so interesting hearing the Labour Party saying what this needs is graft and what this needs is the Border Security Command that they're setting up. Because, Mark, as you explained, there's already a small boats operational command. It was announced a year and a half ago. And I've just been looking at the differences, really, between what Rishi Sunak announced a year and a half ago and what Sir Keir Starmer is saying he'd do today. They're both saying more staff. For Rishi Sunak, it was 730 more staff. For Keir Starmer, it's 1,000 more staff. I mean, I don't know what particular difference that marginal increase would do. Both want to bring people together across government. Both want to involve the military. Both want more cooperation with the French. It seems like the only profound difference here is that Keir Starmer wants to bring in MI5 as well.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's a bit of a slap in the face, to be honest, to those very hard-working members of the Small Boats Operational Command, including the National Crime Agency, to suggest that really it's not been working. They're not going after the criminal gangs in the way that they should. They have successes, but it is, as I've said, very difficult to dismantle highly organised groups that have had years now to get their supply chains in place. Where the small boats are manufactured, for instance, in the backstreet factories in China to the smuggling operations from Asia right into Europe and to the beaches of northern France. There are very significant and sophisticated supply chains in operation there that are difficult to actually get a handle on and to dismantle. I think one key difference, if we're to take anything out of what Sir Keir Starmer is saying today, is not this rejigging of the Small Boats Operational Command into the Borders Security Command. It's the ending of the policy that Rishi Sunak is in the process of implementing on Rwanda. There will be no third party, according to this government. But that then throws up a very significant challenge for Sir Keir Starmer, because he's saying he will employ hundreds of additional staff, these processing workers, to get the asylum claims processed very quickly. But then if you do that and you can't return these people to Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq or Syria, what do you do with them? That's why a third country, according to the government, is so important here. If he doesn't have that option, he's still going to have thousands of migrants languishing in this country with nowhere to remove them to.
Mark, it seems very, very odd that the grand idea of the Labour Party here is a one-pronged strategy. On the one hand, they're going to increase marginally the number of staff working on this border command force and change the name a bit and add in some spies. But on the other hand, they're going to take away the third country whereby you can deport people to. Rishi Sunak always says that he's got to have a multi-pronged strategy, clamping down on the gangs, but also have a deterrent, also have a hostile environment, also have somewhere to put people with no right to be in the UK, somewhere to remove them to. It seems like of all of those four different elements, Keir Starmer's chucking three of them.
Yeah, I think the removal of a third-party option here is the big weakness in what the Labour Party is announcing in terms of their small boat strategy. You have got other governments in Europe who are now actively looking at third countries as a way of being able to get over the hurdle of trying to remove people who you cannot, for good reason, send back to war zones and dysfunctional governments like Assad in Syria, like the regime in Tehran, like the Taliban in Afghanistan. If you don't have that, then you still have the problem of these people being denied asylum, but then having nowhere that you can remove them to. So Keir Starmer can say on the one hand that all his extra processing workers on the claims are going to very quickly reduce the backlog and stop the £8 million a day cost of housing these people in hotels. But then at the end of that process, having potentially denied them asylum, if you've got nowhere to send them to, you're back to square one.
It's an absolutely disastrous situation, although what's more of a disastrous situation, perhaps, is the scale of arrivals that are coming here. I've just been looking at some of our GB views who say that, actually, Keir Starmer saying he'll end the Rwanda scheme has the potential to be an incentive to people to still come across, because it might not be that they're deported by the time there's a general election. These people all have mobile phones. They're not immune to the news. They know that it's likely a new government will come in. Do you think, just very, very quickly, we don't have much time, do you think there's a chance that the Rwanda scheme is undermined by the likely future government saying they're going to scrap it?
Well, undermined and also, as you say, potentially acting as an incentive, scrapping the scheme, because, well, if you listen to the current government, they say that the situation with asylum seekers heading over the border into the Republic shows that it is having an effect. And if you get rid of it, it might well be that incentive that the criminal gangs, always quick to incentivise those people who want to come to the UK, can use as another pull factor. Look, come to the UK, there's now no longer any chance that you'll be sent off to Africa.
No, really interesting stuff there. Mark White, thank you very much for the detail, the policy detail that is so important on days like these. Really appreciate it. Well, coming up, we'll be discussing the UK now being out of recession. Have we really turned a corner? And is the government really deserving of a victory lap? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
to Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
The International Monetary Fund has estimated that Russia will outgrow all advanced economies in 2024. This is in spite of all the sanctions the West has imposed on Russia, in spite of its removal of the SWIFT banking system, in spite of the fact that Germany has almost entirely weaned itself off Russian gas, and in spite of the 50,000 soldiers who have died and the endless resources it has poured into the Ukraine war. So, what are we missing here? Why is Russia going to grow more than the rest of us? Well, it's simple. Russia is willing to make use of its own energy resources to provide abundant supply to its citizens. Increased supply means lower prices, and cheap energy is inextricably linked to economic growth. But since 2008, the United States has grown at twice the rate of the United Kingdom. The big difference is that America has much lower energy prices, while the UK insists on masochistic green policies. But it's no surprise that the Green fanatics in the Scottish government, where they know how to be fanatics, have had to backtrack on their flagship greenhouse gas reduction target. The SNP has committed to reducing Scotland's CO2 emissions by 75% by 2030. Now, the Climate Change Committee has reviewed its policy and advised that the absurd reduction target is out of reach.
Can we accept the CCC's recent re-articulation that this Parliament's interim 2030 target is out of reach? We must now act to chart a course to 2045.
It is time to recognise the truth that net zero by 2050 is unrealistic and unaffordable. It's time we rid ourselves of this foolish and costly idea that will simply make people cold and poor. We need to prioritise cheap energy for Britain's consumers and for companies, for industry, enabling economic growth that will benefit us all.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 12. Now, let's get to some of your says, because gbnews.com/your-say is the way to get involved in this programme. Kez has written in to say, Starmer is setting up a welcome centre. He won't stop the dinghies, but it wouldn't surprise me if he sent a ferry to collect them, i.e. the safe and legal route Labour keep banging on about. All his welcome centre will do is encourage more to come. It's interesting how today Keir Starmer didn't speak so much about the safe and legal routes that he had been speaking about for a long time. Has he changed his mind, or has he just changed his rhetoric as an election nears? Well, Ian is saying neither Labour nor the Tories have a proper plan to stop the small boats. Politicians need to get around a table and come up with a UK plan. Well, that would involve politicians putting the national interest before their party interests. I wonder if that is particularly possible. Perhaps not, sadly. Anton says the UK will never be out of recession until we reverse the immigration situation. And Anton, you've marvellously set up our very next segment, because official figures today show the UK is out of a recession. The economy returned to growth in the first quarter of this year after 2 consecutive quarters of decline last year. Well, GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. That followed a 0.3% decline in the final 3 months of last year. Mr Hunt, our very own Chancellor, said this is proof of the economy returning to full health. But the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says people are still worse off. What's the truth? And does population growth discount our economic growth? Well, joining me now to discuss this is independent economist Julian Jessup. And Julian, I want to start with this first question. We've seen significant population growth over the last decade. Has it discounted GDP growth or just undermined it slightly?
Well, I think that's a good starting point, and it's a good way, I think, also of looking at the numbers that came out this morning. If you look at overall economic activity, then it did increase by 0.6%, as you said, in the first quarter, but that was flattered by growth in the number of people in the economy and those working. If we look at the numbers of GDP per head instead, they did rise, but by a smaller amount, only 0.4%. And if you compare GDP per head to where it was a year ago, it's actually still down 0.7%. So the overall numbers are good news. But if you look at the underlying picture, it's still a little bit weaker. And that does suggest that the overall size of the economy is being flattered by the large number of people coming here. But it doesn't mean that we individually are better off than we were before.
No, that's a really, really important qualifier. So while we talk about 0.6% growth, it's actually per head 0.4% growth. I suppose if we continue at this rate for this year, we will be ahead of where we were last year. That annual growth figure will be more. We had very, very low growth last year. Do you think we're seeing the signs that this 0.6% or 0.4% per person is sustainable for the next few quarters?
Yeah, I think it's important to be positive here as well. The big picture, as you say, is that the economy has turned the corner. I can dig into the details, the numbers, and I found a few caveats, but there are good reasons to think that growth is going to continue over the rest of the year, albeit at a slightly slower pace. So in the second quarter of the year, from April onwards, you've got further big fall in inflation coming. You've had the cuts in national insurance, the big increases in benefits, the national living wage. So people will continue to feel better off. And I also think we're only a month or two now away from the first of a series of interest rate cuts from the Bank of England. So we've got a sort of trio of good news here. We've got confirmation that the UK economy has emerged from recession, which is clearly good news for consumer and business confidence. We've got the prospect of further falls in inflation. And finally, the Bank of England starting to cut rates. So I still think we will get pretty decent growth over the remainder of the year. Probably not enough to rescue the Tories in a likely November election, but at least they'll be fighting on a slightly better economy than we have at the moment.
So we're talking about a growing economy, which is good news. And indeed, since the Brexit referendum, since 2016, the UK economy has grown faster than France and Germany and many European competitors, large developed European competitors. But I put this to you, Julian, that this is like being the tallest midget. This is not a significant thing to cheer. Yes, we're growing faster than the sluggish European competitors we like to compare ourselves to. But compare ourselves to an economy like the United States of America, and we're being left in the dust.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, just simply keeping pace with the sluggish economies of the rest of Europe is nothing much to be proud of. It does suggest that Brexit hasn't had as big a negative impact as some people think. But I think you're right. We should be looking to the US to work out what it is that they are doing right. I must say, I think part of the strength of the US economy is flattered by the fact that they've been cutting taxes and raising spending a lot. And I don't think that's sustainable even in the US, but it's also not a
Julian, why are the US allowed to raise spending and cut taxes? But when Liz Truss does it, everyone loses their minds.
Well, the difference is that the US economy issues in the world's still single most important currency, the US dollar. So they can probably get away with these sorts of things when we unfortunately can't. So I think that's one important difference. I think also there are actually some things that the US is doing that Liz Truss would have liked to have done, but was prevented from carrying through. So the US still has a relatively flexible economy. It's not had the big increase in state intervention that we've had in the UK over the last 5 to 10 years. So I think that's another important difference as well. The UK is not as open and flexible as I think it would as I would like it to be.
And of course, energy is half the price in the United States of America.
Yeah, there are a number of things, but you're right. Lower energy prices is an important part of it. Also, they responded differently to the COVID pandemic from the UK other countries in the rest of Europe. In particular, they didn't, subsidise so many jobs as we did, which sort of locked people into, particular forms of employment. Instead, that they subsidised incomes. That did mean that unemployment rose more sharply, but it allowed the economy to reboot much more effectively. From the pandemic.
And allowed some businesses to fail, which is important in a dynamic economy. Julian Jessup, thank you so much for joining us and talking through what is a very interesting set of figures out today. Back to growth, even back to growth per person, but still perhaps a little bit sluggish when compared to the United States. Well, don't go anywhere, because we're on our way to be discussing Harry and Meghan. They've touched down on what is definitely not a royal tour. Well, at least that's what they're claiming. They're in Nigeria today for a whistle-stop private tour. But before that, let's get your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Tom. It's 12:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the general election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source, and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream, and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
The UK is no longer in recession, with the latest figures showing the economy performed better than expected. The Office for National Statistics estimates GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. The Chancellor says it shows the government's decisions are paying off, but Labour says the Tories are out of touch if they're celebrating the data as a win. Israel's Eurovision Song Contest entrant says Sweden remains safe for everyone, despite protests against her participation. Eden Golan qualified for tomorrow's final, even though she was booed throughout the rehearsals and live event. Protesters want Israel to be banned from the contest in the same way Russia was after it invaded Ukraine. And some breaking news to bring to you. 2 Just Stop Oil protesters have targeted the Magna Carta in the British Library. The women, who are both in their 80s, smashed the glass protecting the historic document. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello to you, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's start if you're heading away from Glasgow, the eastbound M8, all the traffic being held at the moment away from Ridley at junction 12 through towards the Steps Road turn off junction 11. Now there's a vehicle fire, so that's where the traffic being held naturally queues a building. A lane shut on the northbound M6 this lunchtime, Sandbach at 17 up to Middlewich Holmes Chapel at 18. There's a broken down van in the process of being dealt with, but still causing delays. A 4-mile queue towards Romford junction 29 on the clockwise M25. There was a breakdown there, all the lanes are back open, slow back to Brentwood at 28. And the eastbound M27 heading towards the Cadnam turn-off, that's the A31 at junction 1. The earlier collision there's cleared, but we're still seeing a fair amount of congestion on the live cameras. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Today is a good day for the King, a good day for Britain. I'm sure you'll be hoping that those Not My King morons decide to give it a rest for a little while, because he is still dealing with an illness, isn't he?
He's still dealing with an illness, and he appears to be dealing extremely well. I think he comes from the fact that he's extremely strong and fit. I think I understand that will help his treatment enormously. And I think, as your professor was saying, it's the fatigue that can be a brutal thing when you're trying to lead a normal life with cancer. But I think that it's going to really help him psychologically to get out there, and people are going to be giving him enormous support. I mean, I know, as you say, there's an anti-monarchy brigade, but there's been an anti-monarchy brigade since there's been a monarchy. So that is not such a big deal. It has always been there. I feel that Charles is going to get a lot of support from the sort of joyousness of people seeing him and, you know, wishing him well. And I think that that's going to be immensely important to him. It's a very busy time, but I think a boost for William and Kate. William's out and about. We don't know about Kate, but I feel that the King will definitely. It's a very busy time coming up with the anniversary of D-Day in Normandy, which I know he will be desperate to be a part of. Then there's the big royal season, the trooping the colour, the Garter ceremony, royal ascot, and then he is hosting the Emperor and Empress of Japan at the end of June. So it's a absolutely packed month for someone that is presumably going to get very tired.
Yes, indeed. I mean, if he gets through all of that, I think that will be absolutely massive, won't it?
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 12. Now, Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, are in Nigeria as part of a 3-day visit on the invitation of the country's Chief of Defence Staff. Well, the couple will also attend a training session for the charity organisation Nigeria Unconquered, which collaborates with the Invictus Games, as well as a reception where military families will be honoured. Well, joining me now is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker to discuss what is very definitely not a royal tour. These, of course, are private individuals here, aren't they, Cameron?
Yeah, Tom, I think if you've been in the coma for the last 4 years and saw the coverage around Harry and Meghan's trip to Nigeria, you'd be forgiven if you were mistaken into thinking that the two of them were still working members of the royal family. But, of course, they are not. But on the surface, it is playing out very much like a royal tour. They visited this morning a school for a mental health summit. We see Meghan and Harry on the stage there speaking to school children. Before they spoke to these older children, they also went to a kindergarten class who danced and sung for them. They were given wooden beads to put around their necks as well. Meghan revealed that Lily, their daughter's favourite class in school, is dancing and singing. So all of that sounds very much like a royal tour, doesn't it? And then we got on to the mental health stuff, and this is what Meghan's told the children.
To have our first visit to Nigeria, be here with all of you. We believe in you, we believe in your futures, we believe in your ability to continue to tell your stories and to just be honest with each other. There is no need to suffer in silence.
No need to suffer in silence, says Meghan Markle. Now, the whole point of the trip to Nigeria, Harry and Meghan were invited by the Chief of the Defence Staff. Nigeria was part of the Invictus Games for the first time last year. That's the organisation that Prince Harry set up to give a purpose, really, for wounded veterans, a Paralympic-style competition. He did it in conjunction with the Royal Foundation, which at the time was with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, now Prince and Princess of Wales as well. 10 years old this year. But Nigeria is keen to host the Games in a future year. But for Meghan, she revealed in her Archetypes podcast last year that she is 43% Nigerian. That is her heritage. So there's lots of cultural visits as well. But this could raise some royal eyebrows, Tom. The reason being is that Harry and Meghan are no longer working members of the royal family. This does appear to play out like a royal tour, even though it's not officially a royal tour. And King Charles is head of the Commonwealth, and he has not had a chance to visit Nigeria yet, and Prince Harry and Meghan are not there in an official capacity. Prince Harry didn't even see the King when he was in the UK because the King's diary was too busy a few days ago. And also what it's also done is overshadow Prince William's visit to the Scilly Isles, his first time as Duke of Cornwall, as owning the Duchy of Cornwall, to those islands, where he's been meeting many people who are gearing up for the summer season, so and supporting local businesses. So, yes, Harry and Meghan totally, of course, within their rights to do this. It does appear to be going quite successfully so far, but it could raise some royal eyebrows as well.
It's a very, very interesting decision because, of course, I suppose Harry does run the Invictus Games. That's within his rights to promote it. And Nigeria is a very important country. It's either the 5th or 6th most populous country in the world, a country that is set for enormous growth over the next few decades, where its official language is English, member of the Commonwealth, of course. I suppose there's an argument that greater ties between the UK and Nigeria are a very, very good thing.
Absolutely, and I think there was lots of optimism when Harry marries Meghan back in 2018, because they could have been a real asset to the working royals in terms of shoring up relationships with these Commonwealth nations. Harry and Meghan, of course, now going it alone, but I have seen a noticeable shift, really, with Harry and Meghan in the last few months. The statements we're getting from them appear to be a lot more diplomatic. For example, when they told us that Harry was not going to be seeing his father, the statement was from his spokesperson that Harry was very understanding of that fact and hopes to see his father again soon, suggesting to me that A, he wants to build a better relationship with the working royals, but B, both Harry and Meghan have started to get away from this complaining about their privileged lives narrative, which we've had over the last few years with Harry's memoir Spare, the Netflix series documenting their exit from the royal family, and instead they are starting to champion causes they care about, such as wounded veterans, such as the culture of Nigeria, young people's mental health. All of that potentially could maybe turn the tides, but of course, in terms of their popularity, but it's a long, long way to go. They are still deeply unpopular, both here in the United Kingdom and the United States, if you go by what the latest polling suggests. And of course, it appears to be a lot of distrust between Harry and Meghan and the working royals because of all those secrets that were revealed in the Netflix series and Spare.
Well, Cameron Walker, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there in terms of what's happening in Nigeria, and in what I say, and I must make this abundantly clear, is very much not a royal tour. Well, Cameron Walker, thank you. Now, some pictures from environmental campaign group Just Stop Oil. Are they an environmental campaign group, or are they an organisation that likes to terrorise people? Well, here are some activists, and what are they doing? They're smashing the glass protecting a copy of the Magna Carta. Yes, that Magna Carta, 1215, sealed by King John at Runnymede. At Runnymede, your rights were won at Runnymede. No freeman shall be fined or bound or dispossessed of freehold ground except by lawful judgment found and passed upon him by his peers. Forget not, after all these years, the charter signed at Runnymede. Those are Kipling's words, of course, but clearly they are not heeded to by these two individuals who have come to smash what many people see as the foundation stone for the liberties of this country. What an extraordinary moment. Could you imagine individuals breaking their way through to the United States Constitution, smashing the glass that protects that ancient document? It is unbelievable that these people would be allowed to walk in here. And what are they doing? They are simply standing there. Where is the security? Where is the security? Just astonishing. Of course, it is that document and the subsequent ones that built upon those foundational ideas that allow us our freedom. But crucially this, freedom under law. Not anarchy, freedom under law. And I would suggest that those two activists seem to have overstepped that line today. Well, coming up, a whooping cough warning as cases for this year reach a staggering 2,793. They used to be measured in the low hundreds. More on that after this short break.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fantastic Friday out there if you like warm and sunny weather. Just to note, UV levels are high across parts of the south. They haven't seen a lot of sunshine this spring. Don't get caught out. High pressure is dominating and will continue to control our weather, at least for the first part of the weekend. We do have a weather front clearing away from Shetland. Brought a bit of rain earlier and staying fairly cloudy here. Later on today, the mist and low cloud could return to parts of the coast in East Anglia. And some cloud bubbling up this afternoon over northern England. Very small chance of seeing a shower, but for the vast majority, dry, fine. Warm in the sunshine as well, widely over 20 degrees, 24, 25 degrees across the southeast, maybe even up to 26 Celsius. A fine evening to come. Again, for the vast majority, the cloud tending to, again, clear away from Shetland. But we'll see a bit more mist and low cloud returning to eastern counties of England, from Lincolnshire down through to Cambridgeshire, across to the London area and throughout East Anglia. Likely to start a bit grey tomorrow morning. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in urban areas, a little lower in the countryside. On to Saturday, and yes, it could start a bit drab over eastern counties of England, but that mist and low cloud will disappear. Just the threat of it sticking to some coasts. For most, it's another sunny day on Saturday, but a greater chance of seeing 1 or 2 showers break out north of the central belt across Scotland, maybe even a thunderstorm. Vast majority, though, dry, fine, warm and sunny again.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 47 minutes past 12. Now, a Cornish MP is calling on the government to pump more money into coastal communities across the United Kingdom. Steve Double says that funding currently earmarked for rural communities doesn't trickle down to coastal areas. He's urging the government to recognise the need for better provision in seaside towns. I wonder if he's asking them to double it. Well, our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody, reports.
Sam Richardson is a singer-songwriter from St Agnes in Cornwall. Much of his music reflects a sense of frustration with life in a coastal town.
We've got a lot of empty shops in a lot of our town centres, which is sort of causing a lot of death on the high street. I know that's a problem everywhere, but it is particularly bad down in Cornwall. I think the infrastructure as well, for me, is like a really big problem down here. Our roads are just rammed all the time.
Similar problems across the border in Devon. Ilfracombe is the most deprived area in North Devon. Twice the town has applied for levelling up funding. Twice it's been turned down, something North Devon MP Selene Saxby says is frustrating.
It's very complicated. It's not as straightforward as just throwing money at the problem. They're very deep issues. And I think, the Nick Whitty report highlighted some of the health inequalities that you see around the coast, on top of some of the property challenges. I think, stood here today in this wind, you can see just maintaining properties in areas like this is significantly harder.
For several years, the government has acknowledged that rural areas need extra help. But so far, that help doesn't stretch to our coasts. The MP for St Austell and Newquay is pushing the government to change all this.
Truly local people are finding it really challenging because we often have sort of low-wage seasonal work, but very high house prices pushed up because of second homes and holiday lets, etc. And also, I think the disparity review that Theresa May carried out when she was Prime Minister highlighted that working class white boys in coastal communities are some of the most disadvantaged people in the country.
Struggling to get on the housing ladder, struggling to find work, struggling to be heard.
It's interesting that a member of the party that's in government recognises that, which is great, because it is a really important thing. But that government, for the last 10 years, has also cut £500 million in youth services around the country. So not only have you got disaffected young men searching for community, there isn't anywhere for them to go. They're finding these communities in dark areas of the internet. That's the only place that they're finding this. And when you're disaffected and you're disillusioned, it's so much more easy to become radicalized. Imagine if we could raise all of our young men to be, look, life over the last however many thousands of years has swayed towards the benefit of, white guys. And we need to make sure that we make this a more equal and progressive society. So it's your responsibility as a young male to bring people from the LGBTQ plus community into the fold and make sure that they feel safe and heard and understood. And it's your responsibility to do the same thing with women, make sure that they feel safe and understood and heard in these discussions, and not say, there's no room for you in this conversation. We're going to speak to all of the people that it involves, which is obviously great that they have a seat. But I feel like a lot of young, white, working class lads don't feel like they have a seat at the table anymore.
No one thinks the problem of coastal deprivation can be solved overnight. The issue of disaffected young white males even harder. Jeff Moody, GB News.
Interesting thoughts at the end there of a call from an MP about local funding for coastal areas. We got into all sorts of areas after that. But let's get to another big issue affecting the whole country today, because the total number of whooping cough cases in 2024 has reached a staggering 2,793. Now, for context, it used to sit just a few years ago in the low hundreds. A leading expert has warned that more babies will die from bacterial infection unless vaccination rates go up. Now, COVID lockdowns may have impacted the rise in cases as well, particularly among older children and adults with a lack of that sort of mix of bugs and herd immunity. But let's get the view now of NHS paediatric nurse Olivia Princewell. Olivia, this is a big concern for many families, particularly those with young children. It looks like we need to get some of that. Oh, I think we do have you, Olivia. Sorry, we just missed the start of you there. Let's start that again. We're struggling to get some of these communication issues sorted. It seems we need some of Steve Double's rural funding for our own broadband here. But this is a significant issue for people up and down the country. We know that people's trust in some services has been undermined, and it's not just over COVID, but it's spreading to other areas. But one of the particular areas of concern isn't that this is widely affecting all communities equally. Some communities seem more affected than others, and vaccine take-up amongst certain ethnic minority communities does seem to be significantly lower than other communities across the country. It's an area of concern, and it's a hard one for the government to reach. After all, if there is a lack of trust in people in areas of authority, how do those same authority figures then deliver messaging to those groups that don't trust them? You can see the catch-22 here. It raises big questions because, after all, we need more people to engage in a system that is designed to protect us all, to deliver that umbrella of protection across the country. One of the most pernicious elements of this is, of course, pregnant women. There used to be 75% of pregnant women going for jabs against the whooping cough and many other issues. That's fallen to just 50% of pregnant women. A significant decrease in trust there, a big concern, and we're going to be talking more about this later in the programme. But of course, much more to come as well. We're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister. Our very own economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has sat down with Rishi Sunak. We're going to be bringing you that conversation in just a few minutes' time. What on earth has the Prime Minister been saying in regards to the good news that economic growth is up, the slightly less good news that per person it's only up by a bit, and perhaps the even more worrying news that the Bank of England hasn't been cutting any interest rates. This is Good Afternoon Britain, much more to come.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Will the fine weather continue this weekend? Yes and no. For many, a sunny Saturday. On Sunday, though, we do need to watch out for some thunderstorms in the west. Across the extreme east, things turning a bit murky overnight, mist and low cloud spilling back in. But for many, it's a fine, warm evening leading into a dry night with lengthy clear spells. Shouldn't turn too chilly. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in towns and cities. Could be a bit of a drab start to Saturday across eastern counties of England, the mist and low cloud here, but that should be clearing soon after dawn, certainly by mid-morning, tending to disappear. The cloud will bubble up a little bit as we go through the day, parts of northern England, particularly across Scotland, and here come the afternoon, mostly to the north of the central belt, there's the likelihood of one or two scattered showers, could turn out to be quite heavy. Some mist and low cloud may plague eastern coasts, but for the vast majority, it's dry and sunny and maybe even a touch warmer than today, 25, 26 across the southeast, a little cooler around some coast, but for many still over 20 Celsius. Sunday does bring a change. Again, some misty conditions are along some eastern coast, particularly eastern Scotland. A few showers over the Highlands and then further south, Wales and western England, chance of some heavy thundery showers breaking out through the afternoon. Not everywhere catching them, but they could be pretty potent. Some heavy showers in the west of Northern Ireland as well. For many, though, another warm day, plenty more sunshine across the east.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Meghan's launched her new lifestyle range, starting with jams, and it's called American Riviera Orchard. Apparently, it's been made from organic fruits grown in Meghan and Harry's Montecito gardens. If we can believe it, I reserve an air of scepticism. But she sent out 50 jars of this jam to influencers and celebrity friends in the hope of trying to boost some sales to her product. But it's ended up winning for King Charles because fans have gone to Highgrove website and King Charles's jam has sold out.
So hang on, why did they go?
Has gone through the roof.
Why did they go to the Highgrove website?
Well, I think it's a bit of a blow against Meghan because they're saying we don't want your jam. We're going to go and get the king. So it just shows how popular the king is. This is what she's always wanted. Her dream has been to be like this Gwyneth Paltrow style lifestyle guru. She's always loved Gwyneth's website Goop. When she set up the TIG, which was her website when she was still in Suits as a working actress, that was the brand, the style of brand that she was going going for was this Gwyneth-style New York elite, very princessy. So this is her chance now by trying to cash in on her royal title, because she is now a duchess, so she's using that to try and elevate her brand. And she's really now trying to carve out herself as this new Martha Stewart.
And she's coming out with a cooking show as well on Netflix. She's coming out with a cooking show, and I mean, to be fair to Meghan, she has always tried to say that she's into healthy eating, organic food, cooking, but I don't see this being a success. It just will not happen for her, because she's just burnt too many bridges. People just don't believe in her brand. They don't think she's authentic. So, are you an actress? Are you a guru? Are you a duchess? Are you a philanthropist? Who are you, Meghan?
Who actually are you? This is what we're asking. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think Meghan really knows who she is.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of May. Call in the spooks. Keir Starmer has announced he'll rope in MI5 to deal with small boat crossings. Speaking in Dover alongside his new ex-Tory defector MP, the Labour leader said he would ditch the Rwanda plan and launch a new border security command. Would it work? And our debate this hour. Should Israel be allowed to compete in this year's Eurovision contest? One guest believes they should be banned, whilst the other asks, why is this even up for discussion? You won't want to miss that fiery clash. Also, this afternoon, the sentencing of the case of the stabbing of beloved accordion-playing charity busker Thomas O'Halloran, who died after being stabbed repeatedly on his mobility scooter in West London 2 years ago. A 46-year-old man has pleaded guilty, but only to manslaughter. Now, through it all, send in your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. As you can see, I'm all on my lonesome today, so your input is really appreciated. But we're going to be talking this hour to Liam Halligan, of course, our economics and business editor. He's sat down with the Prime Minister, and it'll be very, very interesting to see what the Prime Minister is saying. Is he taking a victory lap for the anaemic growth figures that we're stuttering into, for the ending of the recession? It did end at the end of last year. Many commentators have been saying, we're in recession, whereas actually for the last 4 or 5 months now, we haven't been. So there's a bit of a correction for the record. But it all fits in with the wider discussion. Yes, the United Kingdom is growing more strongly than France, than Germany, than Italy, than many major developed European countries. But being the best of a bad lot is not anything to cheer about. When you compare British growth to that of the United States of America, you can see we sit in an entirely different class. Being best among these comparable European nations is not anything to boast about. We're going to be diving into the detail there, but also get much more on Sir Keir Starmer's small boats plan. It's a busy hour. It's all to come after your headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:01. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. It will be supported by around 1,000 additional officers recruited by MI5. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the general election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source, and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream, and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
The UK is no longer in recession, with the latest figures showing the economy performed better than expected. The Office for National Statistics estimates GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. The Chancellor says it shows the government's decisions are paying off. But Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the Tories are out of touch if they're celebrating the data as a win.
If you look at this Prime Minister's record, since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the economy is still £300 worse off per person in the country. So these numbers today are not deserving of the victory lap that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt seem to want to go on.
The Magna Carta has been targeted by Just Stop Oil protesters. The women, who are both in their 80s, smashed the glass protecting the historic document. Posting on social media, the group says the pair also glued their hands together while accusing the government of breaking climate laws. They're demanding an emergency plan to end the extradition and burning of oil, gas and coal by 2030. And a judge has denied Donald Trump's request for a mistrial in his hush money case, as Stormy Daniels concludes her testimony. The former porn star finished her second day on the stand, where she made explicit allegations of a sexual encounter with the former president. His lawyer unsuccessfully argued for a gag order to be changed so that Trump could respond to her claims. It's the second time this week that a mistrial has been denied. US political analyst Eric Ham says the judge also criticised Trump's lawyer.
And what the judge said was pretty striking. He says that, look, you actually brought this up when you said in your opening that Donald Trump did not have an affair with this woman. So therefore, it was only right for her to go into detail to describe her relationship, to actually paint for the jury that, in fact, this did happen. And he did say that, and he admonished Donald Trump's lawyers that they could have actually objected to many of the things that were said by Stormy Daniels. I do believe that depending on what happens with the verdict, I do believe that we perhaps will see an appeal by Donald Trump's lawyers.
Boeing has suffered a third plane crash in just 2 days. According to reports, 190 people were safely evacuated from an aircraft in Turkey after one of the tyres burst. The latest incident comes after a cargo plane landed on its nose in Istanbul and another jet skidded off the runway and caught fire in Senegal. There's no suggestion Boeing is to blame for the crashes. The company is yet to comment on the incident. In other news, Israel's Eurovision Song Contest entrant has defended Sweden as a safe place to visit. Eden Golan's comments follow ongoing protests against her participation in the event. She qualified for tomorrow's final, even though she was booed throughout the rehearsals and live show. Protesters want Israel to be banned from the contest in the same way Russia was after it invaded Ukraine. And Prince Harry and Meghan are in Nigeria to promote the Invictus Games. The couple landed in the West African country after the Duke of Sussex spent much of the week in London. They'll visit a school during their 3-day trip, and Prince Harry's also expected to meet injured service members at a military hospital. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 1. Well, good news today. Or is it? The United Kingdom is officially out of recession. Indeed, we've been growing all year. The recession ended in December last year. Well, that'll have some journalists having to revisit some of their copy. But is it all good news, and who's to thank? Or who's to blame? Well, let's cross straight to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's been speaking to the Prime Minister in Oxfordshire. Now, Liam, we're going to watch your interview in a few moments' time, but what impression did you get from him about these numbers? Is he, as the Labour Party are saying, taking a victory lap?
Cheers, Tom. I'm here in one of Siemens' many factories in the UK. We're just outside Oxford. Siemens, the technology and engineering company, makes medical equipment here. They employ about 12,000 people across the UK, of course, a major company. My interview with Rishi Sunak, we won't be able to bring it to you straight away. We're still sending it back to GB News headquarters and so on. But we can certainly talk about what Rishi Sunak said to me, because he's coming out fighting, Tom. He's been wounded by the local election results. He's been injured again by defections of Labour MPs. A lot of his parliamentary party still have grave doubts over his leadership, though the plot to oust him before a general election seems to have been shelved for now, but it has just been shelved rather than cancelled. And we ended up trading statistics mainly. Yes, these are good GDP numbers. Yes, there is growth in the UK economy. The UK economy in the first quarter grew by 0.6%. That's January, February and March, and then another 0.4% in April. The Office for National Statistics has literally said the UK economy, quotes, is going gangbusters. And yet, when you take that first quarter growth number, Tom, but you add in inflation and you add in the growth of the population from the first quarter of 2023, what we call real, that is after inflation, GDP per head, that is the economy per individual person, has actually shrunk by 0.7%. So the economy in real terms per head hasn't grown in the first quarter, it's actually shrunk. And that's why Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has been getting her pre-buttles in earlier. Of course, she was saying earlier this week that the Tories are gaslighting the British public on the economy. A lot of us over 40 don't even know what that word means, even though our kids scream it at us all the time. But what it means, of course, Tom, as you'll know, gaslighting is when you try and convince somebody that something is true when it's not true, in a kind of cruel psychological trick. Look, I think both parties have got a point. Yes, the economy's grown. Yes, it's better to have at least nominal growth than no growth. And yes, the UK economy is now firmly out of recession. But when you look at the high inflation that we've had, and you look in particular at the high immigration that we've had, it's entirely understandable if a lot of voters, a lot of GB News viewers and listeners haven't yet felt this recovery yet because of the cost of living rises and because of the growth in the population.
That's really, really interesting, Liam, looking at those numbers there. 0.6% growth is the headline figure, but per head, when adjusted for inflation and compared with when? The quarter beforehand or the same point the year beforehand?
No, compared to the same quarter in 2023. So the year-on-year growth, which is the really important growth. Look, I said this to the Prime Minister. He countered with some other statistic. I wasn't going to use the 5 minutes that we're allotted with the leader of our country to quiz him on the economy. I wasn't going to trade statistics with him in a television interview. But I'm telling you now, because I've read the GDP numbers very, very closely, that if you take into consideration inflation and population growth, GDP per capita in real terms was lower in the first quarter of 2024 than it was in the first quarter of 2023 by 0.7%. Look, I'm not being churlish here at all. The government has got an increasingly improving story to tell on the economy. The Bank of England governor said just yesterday, he's not known for being a party starter, is our friend the Governor Andrew Bailey, but he was actually, quite upbeat yesterday. He said interest rate cuts are coming soon. There have been considerable improvements. We're not quite sure yet, but there will be interest rate cuts. Now, a lot of our viewers and listeners, Tom, don't want those interest rate cuts. They're pensioners who live on their savings. They want higher interest rates. But a lot of our viewers and listeners, and in particular a lot of voters, are younger, they're trying to get on the housing ladder, they're trying to pay rent to landlords who have mortgages themselves in many cases. And so an interest rate cut, hopefully lower rent increases, hopefully lower cost of home loans when you're trying to buy a home or buy more space as your family expands. Those rate cuts are coming. There won't be 2 or 3 before an election. There's more likely to be 1 or possibly 2 before the next election, and there'll probably be more tax cuts before the next election. So what we've got today, Tom, are figures which show, understandably, the government is stressing that GDP growth is up, but GB News viewers and listeners may not be feeling that GDP growth because when you take into account the cost of living, inflation, and you take into account population growth, then that recovery isn't really there. That's the scores on the doors. They are the facts. as presented by the ONS. It's just we need to get beyond the headline numbers from time to time to really report the news, in my view.
Yes, no, really, really important to do. As Benjamin Disraeli once said, lies, damn lies, and statistics. And certainly when looking at the difference between quarter to quarter or year and year and adjusting for population or not, you get all sorts of different numbers. Liam, thank you as ever for making it so clear for everyone listening and watching. Well, I'm told that the GB News elves are busy pushing Liam's interview through our internal tubes here at GB News, and we'll get it pumped out as soon as we possibly can. But yes, there we go. Our business and economics editor sitting down with the Prime Minister coming very, very shortly indeed. But in the meantime, Sir Keir Starmer has said that people smuggling gangs must be smashed as he unveiled Labour's plans to deal with the migration crisis, with proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat smugglers like terrorists. He plans to recruit 1,000 additional officers and spend 75 million quid on the scheme, equating it to the costs of a year sending some migrants to Rwanda. Well, what is the reality of this scheme, and have we seen anything like it before? Joining me now is the international security and border control expert, Henry Bolton. Now, Henry, I've been reading some of what you have said on this issue, and it seems like this might be a slight rehash.
Indeed, Tom. Keir Starmer, one of his centerpieces is based on something which I think is an admirable objective, which is to get agencies working on our border out of their silos and working in a more cohesive manner. But his proposal to solve that is setting up a border security command. Well, actually, we already have a small boats command, which brings the same people together, has the same objectives. I see very little difference here. It seems to me that he's kind of probably just shoving things around the board a bit and saying, well, look, I'm going to pay for a slight uplift in that, some additional staff, with the 75 million that we're going to save from axing Rwanda. So I think that's a little bit smoke and mirrors and nothing particularly new. I also, detect in his words that a more open approach, or he's portraying it that way, to working with our European neighbours. That, again, absolutely, the more collaboration, the more cooperation we have on this issue, the better. However, we've got to remember that Keir Starmer leads a party that is supported very much so by people who would like to rejoin the European Union, or at least reintegrate us with the European Union further, and many of whom would like to see us have pretty much open borders. So I think this is, again, he's trying to talk tough to attract the votes of the people who would think themselves as Tory voters but are staying at home because they don't see the Conservatives delivering on immigration. I think he's trying to attract them, or certainly keep them away from the Conservatives, whilst actually not going to change anything fundamental. The point that you mentioned about additional counter-terrorism laws, it's not quite that, Tom. What it is, he wants to use or adapt present counter-terrorism legislation for use in dealing with organised crime. I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't think it's the right way, partly because he talks about border security, and he's conflating, like a lot of people do, border security with immigration. Immigration policy and how we respond to the immigration challenges is one area of work, and border security is another. I say that because border security covers everything going on our borders, the facilitation of safe and secure trade and the passage of people. It's about dealing with all of the cocaine, all of the heroin. 97% of the firearms that are used in crime in this country all come across our borders. Fishing controls, that's part of our borders. And our problem in this country, and it's one I've been saying, trying to highlight for a very long time to politicians and decision makers across the political spectrum, is you need to bring all of that together, like many countries have, in an overarching strategy. You've got clear national objectives. It creates unity of evidence. This is just, I fear that ultimately all this is going to do, Tom, is provide a rationale for doing away with Rwanda, a rationale for opening up routes for these people, because I refer back to the point that most of his supporters would like to see us open the door to people who are trying to get here from the north of France. But
Yes,
in
Henry,
another way.
On that point, you've mentioned a couple of times the idea that Starmer's going to try and seek some new deals with the European Union. It seems that today Starmer is saying we're going to have all of this magical, wonderful sharing of resources and information, and it's not going to cost us a penny. Clearly, the EU will ask for something in return for some of these agreements, and it might well be the sharing of migrants.
Indeed, Tom. And I think, you know, he would win plaudits from his supporters, Labour Party supporters, if he were to go down that route. And I think he will. And look, I spent 3 years holding the portfolio for civilian border management for the European Union. And you're absolutely correct. If you want to be part of the European architecture for dealing with immigration, migration, if you like, and you're working with Brussels on that issue, with the European Union as an entity in that sense, then you are going to have to go down the route that you've just suggested. Whatever the European Union wants to do, you're going to have, in terms of immigration and sharing asylum seekers around and so on, you're going to have to be part of that. I think politically, once in power, that would strengthen his position politically. However, for those of us, and it's increasingly apparent now that this is the case, for those of us who are absolutely convinced that mass immigration at the rate we've got it is not a net contributor to the economy. It is a net draw, a debt on the, it's drawing on the economy. It's costing us money. It's costing us socially. It's costing us culturally. It's costing us in terms of the rule of law and security, criminality. So, you know, for me, border security has been my thing. If you want to secure your nation, you do not go down the route that Keir Starmer, I believe, is going down.
You don't want to export your controls or export how those controls are applied, or even move your border from the English Channel to the Mediterranean Sea. No, Henry Bolton, thank you very much for joining us and talking through those issues. Really, really important stuff there. We're going to be coming up to a debate next. Should Israel be allowed to compete in this year's Eurovision Song Contest? There have been thousands of people protesting in Sweden saying that they shouldn't, but should we be even asking this question? You don't want to miss this debate coming up next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to Scotland, home of Hamza Yusuf's hate crime law, aka the Clype's Charter.
Clype, a delightfully Scottish word for a grass, a snitch, or in the context of Russell Finley's opening gambit during the hate crime debate at Holyrood last week, reporting your friends, family and neighbours to the police for alleged hate crimes. The SNP responded by doubling down on the new law's ability to protect vulnerable victims.
I am confident that we have robust legislation that will protect those who are vulnerable to harm.
But other victims are emerging in the wake of this new legislation. As the bill moved through Parliament, concerns rose of police inundated with vexatious complaints, targeting individuals who had committed no crimes. The first fortnight of the new law gave rise to nearly 9,000 complaints.
The vast majority, at least 95%, have been deemed not to be crimes.
False reporting is nothing new. A social post from Scottish Conservative Murdo Fraser was flagged by a trans rights activist in November.
Police decided that no crime had been committed, but nevertheless that was recorded as a non-crime hate incident.
And Alba Westminster leader Neil Hanvey says he too has been targeted under pre-existing legislation.
I've been the victim of at least one of those complaints, and you know that's taken up the time of police officers.
Thick skin can be expected of our elected officials, but what about the public? 74-year-old Morag McDougall-Brown says she was reported to police by a neighbour, and the experience has taken its toll.
I hate to think that anybody like me or similar to my age would ever have to go through this, because I really don't think I will ever go over it.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Friday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Lee Anderson's Real World at 7. At 8, it's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 1. Now, in the last hour, we brought you some astonishing pictures of two Just Stop Oil activists smashing the glass casing that protects one of the oldest copies of Magna Carta. That guarantee of our liberty, that original document upon which the future waves of reform and constitutional development was built, the very idea that founded our principles. Well, John says two women smashing the glass over the Magna Carta, grab them, get those tools off them, don't stand there filming them. It's utter vandalism. They must be locked up. Indeed, Graham says, I completely understand the urge to help the planet and do the right thing, but you're just losing support by touching the Magna Carta, a total lack of respect. And I think that that is precisely the sentiment that is echoed very, very widely indeed. The Magna Carta, of course, was originally envisaged to stop the king being above the law. The law instead should have been above the king. That was the meaning of that document, and it started that trickle of democracy and indeed rights. But those rights come under law, and it seems that Just Stop Oil don't quite understand that. Well, let's move on now, because Israel has made it through to the finals of the Eurovision Song Contest. That's happening tomorrow night. Now, despite thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters wanting them removed, they are through. So our big debate question today is, should Israel be banned from competing in the Eurovision Song Contest altogether? Well, joining us is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC and Channel 4, Akwil Ahmed, who says that this shows double standards. Why ban Russia but include Israel? On the other side, we've got politics and investigations editor at the Jewish Chronicle, David Rose, who asks, what has the Eurovision Song Contest got to do with this war? Extraordinary that we're even discussing this. Well, let's get straight into it. Akwil Ahmed and David Rose join me now. Akwil, let's start with you. Why remove Israel from this competition?
Well, that's not. Well, actually, that's a different question to what I was actually originally going to talk about. Was actually when I say double standards, that's the problem. Actually, it's not whether or not you should remove Israel as such. It's if you've removed Russia, then do you have a conversation about removing Israel? I mean, for me, I'm not really bothered about the Eurovision Song Contest in that sense, but I can understand that particular kind of argument, and I understand the anger as well. At a time when you're in the middle of a war, do you have somebody who's from one of those countries involved in this conflict? Do you have them in a celebratory kind of like competition? I personally don't really care, if I'm really honest. I don't really care about the Eurovision Song Contest anymore. But I can actually see the two arguments here. One is it does feel like double standards, and also the same with FIFA and other organisations like that. And secondly, it feels like, for many people, it will feel quite bad taste. But having said that, I understand as well, there'll be lots of people who say, well, it's not bad taste and Israel deserves to be there. Then we'll get into another conversation, which is, it's the Eurovision Song Contest. Why do we have Israel and Australia, for that matter, in this? And what does that actually really say about our thinking about what Israel is, and actually what Israel itself thinks it is? So I think there's a lot of questions here to be asked that go beyond what is effectively a show which some people like, but the vast majority of us, probably it passes us by.
Well, let's throw that over to David Rose then. This is a legitimate conversation to be having, says Akwil.
Well, I'm slightly baffled. To kind of phrase, I see nul point in the argument that he is making. To compare Israel's actions currently with those of Russia is just offensive. Russia launched an unprovoked invasion of a sovereign state. It has committed extremely well documented cases of murder on a vast scale. It has butchered and tortured prisoners. It has smashed towns to smithereens and continues to attack civilian infrastructure the length and breadth of Ukraine. Israel was the victim of an unprovoked terrorist attack on October the 7th, in which at least 1,200 people were murdered. Many were subjected to appalling sexual violence. Hamas continues to have 150 hostages, many of them who, regrettably, may well be dead. I don't quite see how there is an equivalence between Israel and Russia that would justify Israel's removal from the Eurovision Song Contest, nor indeed what that could possibly achieve.
Well, let's throw that back to Aquil. These are two completely different situations. Yeah. Russia is the aggressor, whereas Israel is the victim.
Well, I think he's not. I thought we were having a conversation here rather than point scoring. The fact of the matter is, a lot of that is not all. Some of it, I actually agree with a lot of what's been said, but I also disagree with a lot of what's been said in that respect. The fact of the matter is, if you're the aggressor or not the aggressor, in some people's eyes, Russia is an aggressor or it's not an aggressor. Israel is an aggressor. Hamas is an aggressor. It depends. Everybody has an interpretation of this. The question is, for those people that feel strongly about it, is their opinion, is it warranted to have a conversation about whether or not they feel Israel should be included in this? I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't. I'm simply saying there are lots of people who will feel that actually it feels inappropriate. And there are lots of people who will disagree with what's just been said. Not to say that it didn't happen, October 7th didn't happen, because of course it did, and what Hamas did was outrageous. But also at the same time, we have seen, as was said about what Russia has done to the civilian infrastructure in the Ukraine, well, we've also seen what's been done to the civilian infrastructure in Gaza as well. So it's a very nuanced conversation. It's not the time to be kind of like making blanket statements like that. I'm simply saying it's a legitimate conversation to be had. Is this the right thing to do? Should there be a conversation about whether or not Israel should be included in the Eurovision Song Contest or not? I don't care, personally, like I said, but some people do care. And I think having that conversation is healthy. Ultimately, I don't think it will make a difference. I think Israel will be in there, and will they win or not? I don't know, because the voting in the Eurovision Song Contest seems to be all over the place anyway.
David, is this conversation healthy, free speech? Should we not be supporting these sorts of conversations?
I don't care if people want to have a conversation, and I'm happy to participate in it. But if we are having a conversation, I will express my own opinion in it, which is exactly what I'm doing. Now, I just want to pick up on one point here that, it said no one denies that what Hamas did was terrible on October the 7th. Unfortunately, that is very much not the case. There is a growing body of what I would call October the 7th denial out there. It's all over the internet. It's on platforms like TikTok. And, October the 7th denial has become a kind of propaganda industry from those who effectively support the Hamas terror group. Now, that's important to remember because, yes, there is no doubt whatsoever about what Hamas did, but millions of people are now falling prey to propagandists who very much claim the reverse. Well, that is not the context in which, the Eurovision Song Contest seems to have a great deal of relevance.
Well, I'm afraid we have... Aquil, if you can very briefly come back on that. We are running out...
Well, I was just going to say, for many people, look, I'm not saying for 1 second that I think October 7th didn't happen, but also, there are lots of propagandists on all sides, because that's what happens when you're in the middle of an actual conflict. People say it. People are saying that there is nothing being done against the infrastructure in Gaza, but we see the images and we know what's around us. The fact of the matter is, no one side is behaving well in this particular conflict, because that's what happens when you're in the middle of a conflict. And that's why for some people it feels like it's worth having a conversation about whether it's proper for Israel to be in this competition at this moment in time. Whether it will make a difference, I don't think it should. And actually, whether they want to be in there, so why not?
Aquil and David, I'm afraid we have run out of time there. We'll have to get you both back, because I know there's so much more that can be said on this subject, but we've got to get to the latest headlines, after which we'll be talking about this remarkable interview with the accused stalker, the real Martha from that TV show Baby Reindeer. You don't know what I'm talking about, or do you? We'll have that after the headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the general election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source, and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream, and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
The UK is no longer in recession, with the latest figures showing the economy performed better than expected. The Office for National Statistics estimates GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. The Chancellor says it shows the government's decisions are paying off, but Labour says the Tories are out of touch if they're celebrating the data as a win. The Magna Carta has been targeted by Just Stop Oil activists. Two women, both in their 80s, smashed the glass protecting the historic document. Posting on social media, the group says the pair also glued their hands together while accusing the government of breaking climate laws. And Prince Harry and Meghan are in Nigeria to promote the Invictus Games. The couple landed in West Africa after the Duke of Sussex spent much of the week in London. They'll visit a school during their three-day trip, and Prince Harry's also expected to meet injured service members at a military hospital. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2528 and €1.1622. The price of gold is £1,891 and 9 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,446 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fantastic Friday out there if you like warm and sunny weather. Just to note, UV levels are high across parts of the south. We haven't seen a lot of sunshine this spring. Don't get caught out. High pressure is dominating and will continue to control our weather, at least for the first part of the weekend. We do have a weather front clearing away from Shetland. Brought a bit of rain earlier and staying fairly cloudy here. Later on today, the mist and low cloud could return to parts of the coast in East Anglia, and some cloud bubbling up this afternoon over northern England. Very small chance of seeing a shower, but for the vast majority, dry, fine. Warm in the sunshine as well, widely over 20 degrees, 24, 25 degrees across the southeast, maybe even up to 26 Celsius. A fine evening to come. Again, for the vast majority, the cloud tending to again clear away from Shetland, but we'll see a bit more mist and low cloud returning to eastern counties of England, from Lincolnshire down through to Cambridgeshire, across to the London area and throughout East Anglia. Likely to start a bit grey tomorrow morning. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in urban areas, a little lower in the countryside. On to Saturday, and yes, it could start a bit drab over eastern counties of England, but that mist and low cloud will disappear. Just the threat of it sticking to some coasts. For most, it's another sunny day on Saturday, but a greater chance of seeing one or two showers break out north of the central belt across Scotland, maybe even a thunderstorm. Vast majority, though, dry, fine, warm and sunny again.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello again. I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to North Yorkshire firstly, and Stephen Bank, the westbound A66. Now, it's currently blocked from the A1M junction 53, that's Scotch Corner, through towards Smallways and Queuing. There's been a collision there. You're heading towards Rotherham, the southbound side of the Rotherham Road. The A633 is blocked from Wannop Street down toward the Parkgate roundabout. Also around the route to Queuing, is whilst a collision is being dealt with this lunchtime. Now, there's congestion either side of the M60, now anti-clockwise. Worsley Elliott 13 to the Eccles interchange. That's towards junction 12, so towards the M62. A lane shut. A collision's causing queues back to the Swinton interchange, but it's slow both sides. And Dartford in Kent into town, the A2 between the Dartmouth interchange, the M25, and Dartford Heath. That stretch closed and queuing. That's for investigation work. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's
Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 or even 39 minutes past 1. Now, the world is obsessed with the mystery of the Netflix series Baby Reindeer. And last night, the alleged real-life stalker, quote-unquote Martha, well, she's actually called Fiona, gave her first ever TV interview where she denied all allegations from writer and actor Richard Gadd. Here's some of what she had to say.
And we've had no apologies from Netflix or him or nothing. I mean, for someone who says he feels sorry for me, I've had no apology, and I have this Martha character seems to have smashed up a bar, sexually assaulted him in a canal, been to prison. There are a number of other allegations.
And none of that is true.
That's not true.
Well, that was Fiona Harvey, who has identified herself as the real-life Martha from the show. Joining me now is broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford, because Lucy, a lot of people, millions of people, have seen this interview. Tens of millions of people around the world have seen the series. It's becoming a sensational bust-up.
Yes, and the lady who may or may not be Martha, Fiona, has pointed out that there has been a huge amount of publicity around this, and it's one of the reasons in which she speaks of potentially suing Netflix because she feels that they are defaming her and that they might be doing so primarily to generate more publicity for their show. It's one of the themes of her interview with Piers Morgan. I mean, the interview is absolutely fascinating. It's just as gripping in a way as the drama, because you are trying to work out when you're watching, is she telling the truth? How much is fact and how much is fiction? And I think I would say perhaps the most obvious thing, which is it is incredibly difficult to tell.
Yes, absolutely. That's definitely the impression I got. I think for the first half of the interview, I was thinking, oh, hang on, this person's denying absolutely everything. But then the second half of the interview, her story started to change a little bit. She started to say, well, even if I did send these 41,000 emails, and it's like, did you send the emails or didn't you? You said you didn't, and now you're asking, well, even if I did. You're a professional psychotherapist. Can you give any sort of insight into her body language, the way she was presenting herself? Were there any clues in how she acted in this interview?
Well, there were a couple of things, but I think we also have to pay great credit to Piers Morgan because he interviews her brilliantly, because he does actually create a show of two halves where there is some quite softball questions in the beginning. And then, as you say, it changes in the second half and she does become more defensive. Now, in terms of her body language, she was incredibly still physically throughout the whole experience. And I couldn't work out whether that was because she was very ill at ease or because she was incredibly composed. But for me, there were a couple of things that happened really early on that were very telling. The first was that within about the first 90 seconds, she is responding to Piers in a very particular way, which is to say, you know, I came on your show because you too have been persecuted. So in that moment, she's trying to establish a bond with Piers, and in Freudian terms, and I stress. I'm not saying this in a sexual sense, but in a Freudian sense, she's being very seductive in that moment. She's trying to put her and Piers on a level in order to, make that bond and to establish some form of trust. And I thought that was a very telling thing for someone to do who has no TV training, who doesn't necessarily know about how to perform in a TV studio, but she definitely knows how to create a rapport instantaneously with someone. And of course, that's the very premise of the show, which is that this Martha character goes into a bar and establishes a very fierce attachment to someone who was working there. So that was the first thing. And then I think you're absolutely right. The second thing, which is that her story stays very solid, and she herself physically has this presence that's very solid. And then in the second half of the interview, her eye movement is much more rapid. It's much more gazing around up into the corner, trying to remember things. And the closer that Piers gets to this sense of, yeah, but was it 41,000 emails and she trips up a couple of times, it does end up looking a lot more agitated. And therefore, what does that mean? Does it mean that she's feeling much more stressed? Or is it that she's actually feeling that that her cover has been blown?
It was
fascinating. Hard to tell, but it was a very intriguing performance in that way.
Certainly. And one of the things that I think was my biggest takeaway is that she said to Piers Morgan that she only met Richard Gadd 4 or 5 times. But if that's true, my goodness me, Richard Gadd is the most excellent sort of painter and absorber of character, because the way in which this character is portrayed in the show, that Fiona becomes Martha, the body language is the same, the intonation in the voice is the same, the way in which they sort of engage people, as you were discussing, is precisely the same, which suggested to me that perhaps they had met more than 4 or 5 times to get that depiction of the real-life person, quite frankly, so spot on.
And again, there were a number of moments in the interview where Fiona makes an assertion, but then later when Piers Morgan challenges her on maybe some timings, maybe the amount of voicemail messages that may or may not have been left, there are some inconsistencies in the story. And we're talking about some events that happened quite some time ago. The problem is that when you are under pressure, and a TV studio, for many people, it is a source of stress, a location of stress, we might actually not be performing at our best. We might say things that we don't mean. And as a result, it's very hard to identify whether she herself was consciously aware that some of these inconsistencies were coming up. But for sure, it is an extraordinary situation that you could have someone who says, I only met him a handful of times, but actually there is so much about my life which has suddenly found itself in a Netflix program, which says at the very outset of every single episode, this is based on a true story. Where I think she has, where I felt a great deal of sympathy for her, was this sense that Richard Gadd, she claims, has said a number of times that he feels very sorry for her. And her retort to that was, well, in a way, you've got a very funny way of showing it because of the way that you're portraying someone a bit like me on screen.
Well,
so
Lucy, I'm afraid we have run out of time here, but really, really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for talking us through what was a remarkable interview. And I'm sure this is not a story that has ended today or ended last night. This will run and run. Psychotherapist Lucy Beresford there. Well, coming up, the world has been told to brace for a severe geomagnetic storm today. But what on earth does that mean? Stay with us and find out.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Many of the people that you had invited to come and speak were people who've been elected in their own countries. I'm thinking of people like Suella Braverman. I'm thinking of Nigel Farage, who has been a member of the European Parliament, of course, had an enormous impact on British politics. And Viktor Orban, who has been elected and re-elected. Many people may not care for the Prime Minister of Hungary, but he's certainly an elected person.
And in addition, we had about 15 to 16 members of the European Parliament who were also elected, and they really live in Brussels. And you would imagine that Brussels, being the head of the capital of the EU, would allow elected members of its own parliament to have an opportunity to voice their views. So I think what was very interesting about this is that the mayors overplayed their hands, so that because they overplayed their hands, all public opinion became entirely on our side. It was so evident, so transparent, that this was really an attempt to use the police instead of arguments to react to our conference, that it was a real direct threat, and it is still a direct threat to the freedom of assembly and to free speech.
So how do you think it leaves it? Is it more likely or less likely that there'll be future bans?
I think this is a trial run. What I'm really worried about is that if the future of democracy and free speech depends on the ruling of one judge, and you have to remember that 3 other judges ruled against us, then democracy is in big trouble. What worries me absolutely is that a strong body of political opinion amongst established politicians believes that it is okay to cancel conferences and to crush the people's opinions and prevent the freedom of assembly. Democracy actually depends on these foundational values.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Friday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Lee Anderson's Real World at 7. At 8, it's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. It is 10 minutes to 2. Now, the world has been told to brace for a severe geomagnetic storm today, the first in nearly 20 years. Now, it could cause major disruption to power grids and mobile phone signals. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States has issued this severe geomagnetic storm warning late last night. It's the first alert aired since 2005, when we were hit with the highest dose of radiation in half a century. Well, joining me now is Andy Lound, the space and planetary scientist. And Andy, the first thing that came into my head reading this news was, in 2005, there was technology. Lots of people had a very basic mobile phone, but my goodness, there's a lot more technology on the Earth today. Are we sure we know how this will interact with all of our systems, from GPS to 5G to everything in between?
Good afternoon. That's the big issue. This is a major event. In 2003, for instance, we had power systems go down in Sweden. We had transformers damaged in South Africa. Now, as you rightly say, we're much more dependent on electronic equipment, which means it's got a lot of electromagnetic energy going all over the place. And the storm that we're actually seeing coming towards us at the moment was a number of solar flares and 5 coronal mass ejections heading towards the Earth, pointing towards us. So this could be quite a severe effect. And the warning goes out to actually warn companies like power industry, like communications firms, to be careful and prepared to put your systems perhaps into safe mode. Systems can go into safe mode, but that does mean disrupting things like GPS, communications, general communications could go down, the internet could go down, and of course, general internet protection. For instance, we got hard drives here, for instance, and if the energy is powerful enough to penetrate through the atmosphere, it peels back our magnetic field. We get auroral effects, but this energy can come down, and of course, it can damage your hard drives, it can damage critical systems, and it's not as dangerous as what we fear, a Carrington event, which happened in 1859. Bearing in mind, a Carrington event in 1859, we only had wireless telegraphy then. The wireless telegraphs blew, they caused fires through the sparking. Now, an event like that could actually black out this planet because we're so dependent on it.
Do we know how common these sorts of events are? I think all of us sort of have these buzzwords buzzing around in our head, whether it's coronal mass ejection or severe geomagnetic storm warning. We sometimes read these things, but how regular are they, specifically on the scale of which you were just describing?
Yeah, coronal mass ejections during the peak of the solar cycle, which we're in at the moment, which happens every 11 years. We have 5 of those a day. Not all of them face the Earth. That's the point, because the sun rotates and we're going around the Earth. But this happens to be a huge collection of sunspots, which where you have this extreme electromagnetic radiation taking place. And these are heading towards the Earth. So that does happen. And there's a chance that during an 11-year cycle, we're going to get a number of these hitting us at that time, with the peak being at the end of the 11-year cycle, which is happening over the next few months. So they do happen over an 11-year cycle, so it's a regular basis for us. To have 5 coronal mass ejections, though, heading towards us in one go, that is quite a rare event in itself. 2003, since we had something on this scale heading towards us. And as for a Carrington event, we don't think we've seen a Carrington event since 1859, and we probably will get one at some point. And there are worries, severe worries about this kind of event happening to us. I think there was a TV series done once where that happened, and the world just got simply blacked out. It's the danger of us being so reliant on electronic communications. For instance, a nuclear defense system was actually switched off, and the Americans thought at one point that the Russians had actually tampered with the system. It wasn't. It was one of these events.
Yeah. Andy Lown, thank you so much for joining us and, frankly, scaring the heebie-jeebies out of all of us as well. Really appreciate it. Well, coming up next hour, we're going to have that interview with the Prime Minister. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Will the fine weather continue this weekend? Yes and no. For many, a sunny Saturday. On Sunday, though, we do need to watch out for some thunderstorms in the west. Across the extreme east, things turning a bit murky overnight, mist and low cloud spilling back in. But for many, it's a fine, warm evening leading into a dry night with lengthy clear spells. Shouldn't turn too chilly. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in towns and cities. Could be a bit of a drab start to Saturday across eastern counties of England, the mist and low cloud here, but that should be clearing soon after dawn, certainly by mid-morning, tending to disappear. The cloud will bubble up a little bit as we go through the day, parts of northern England, particularly across Scotland, and here come the afternoon, mostly to the north of the central belt, there is the likelihood of 1 or 2 scattered showers, could turn out to be quite heavy. Some mist and low cloud may plague eastern coasts, but for the vast majority, it's dry and sunny and maybe even a touch warmer than today, 25, 26 across the southeast, a little cooler around some coast, but for many still over 20 Celsius. Sunday does bring a change. Again, some misty conditions are along some eastern coast, particularly eastern Scotland. A few showers over the Highlands, and then further south, Wales and western England, chance of some heavy thundery showers breaking out through the afternoon. Not everywhere catching them, but they could be pretty potent. Some heavy showers in the west of Northern Ireland as well. For many, though, another warm day, plenty more sunshine across the east.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Hi, my name's Phil Cox, and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say, why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of May. And call in the spooks. Keir Starmer has announced he's going to rope in MI5 to deal with these small boat crossings. Speaking in Dover alongside his new ex-Tory defector MP, a very right-wing one at that, the Labour leader said he would ditch the Rwanda plan and launch a new border security command. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are in Nigeria today for a whistle-stop tour. This is very much not a royal visit, or so we're told. So what really are the couple's intentions? Also this afternoon, the sentencing in the case of the stabbing of beloved accordion-playing charity busker Thomas O'Halloran, who died after being stabbed repeatedly on his mobility scooter in West London 2 years ago. A 46-year-old man has pleaded guilty, but only to manslaughter. It all sounds very impressive, doesn't it? A border security command. It's going to involve organisations from all across government. There are going to be 1,000 new people working on it, and it will smash these criminal gangs. If only someone had told Keir Starmer about Small Boats Operational Command, a very similar organisation to the one that he's proposing. It indeed has 730 additional staff as of the start of last year. It brings people together across government, involves the military and, indeed, cooperation with the French as well. All the things that Keir Starmer is proposing for his Border Security Command. Small Boat Command, Border Security Command. Seems like it might be two halves of the same walnut. What do you think about Labour's proposals? Of course, the one big difference for Labour's proposals isn't just the involvement of MI5, it's the shutting down of the Rwanda scheme, having no safe third country with which to deport people to. So, how on earth do you deport people, or do you just rely on chasing after these gangs that are like playing whack-a-mole? As soon as you crush them in one country, they ping up in another, right around the world. Is it really a comprehensive strategy if you take away one of these pillars of the multi-pronged plan that has been put into place over the last 2 years? Well, big questions and lots of discussion to come on Labour's plan to smash the gangs and stop the boats. Have your say, gbnews.com/your say. We'll get to all of it after your headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. It will be supported by around 1,000 additional officers recruited by MI5. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the general election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source, and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream, and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
Now, the Prime Minister has defended the government's policies on net zero. Speaking at an event in Oxford today, Rishi Sunak said the government is aiming to reach targets in a more pragmatic way. The Prime Minister acknowledged he'd received a lot of flack for his policies, but maintains it is the right move for the country. Meanwhile, the Magna Carta has been targeted by Just Stop Oil protesters. Two women who are both in their 80s smashed the glass, protecting the historic document. Posting on social media, the group says the pair also glued their hands together while accusing the government of breaking climate laws. They're demanding an emergency plan to end the extraction and burning of oil, gas and coal by 2030. The UK is no longer in recession, with the latest figures showing the economy performed better than expected. The Office for National Statistics estimates GDP rose by 0.6% between January and March. The Chancellor says it shows the government's decisions are paying off, but Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the Tories are out of touch if they're celebrating the data as a win.
If you look at this Prime Minister's record, since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the economy is still £300 worse off per person in the country. So these numbers today are not deserving of the victory lap that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt seem to want to go on.
In other news, a judge has denied Donald Trump's request for a mistrial in his hush money case. And it comes as Stormy Daniels concludes her testimony. The former porn star finished her second day on the stand, where she made explicit allegations of a sexual encounter with the former president. His lawyer unsuccessfully argued for a gag order to be changed so that Trump could respond to her claims. It's the second time this week that a mistrial has been denied. US political analyst Eric Ham says the judge also criticised Trump's lawyer.
And what the judge said was pretty striking. He says that, look, you actually brought this up when you said in your opening that Donald Trump did not have an affair with this woman. So therefore, it was only right for her to go into detail to describe her relationship, to actually paint for the jury that, in fact, this did happen. And he did say that, and he admonished Donald Trump's lawyers that they could have actually objected to many of the things that were said by Stormy Daniels. I do believe that depending on what happens with the verdict, I do believe that we perhaps will see an appeal by Donald Trump's lawyers.
Israel's Eurovision Song Contest entrant has defended Sweden as a safe place to visit. Eden Golan's comments follow ongoing protests against her participation in the event. She qualified for tomorrow's final, even though she was booed throughout the rehearsals and live show. Protesters want Israel to be banned from the contest in the same way Russia was after it invaded Ukraine. And Prince Harry and Meghan are in Nigeria to promote the Invictus Games. The couple landed in the West African country after the Duke of Sussex spent much of the week in London. They'll visit a school during their three-day trip, and Prince Harry is also expected to meet injured service members at a military hospital. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has said that people smuggling gangs must be smashed as he unveiled Labour's plans to deal with the migration crisis. with proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. He plans to recruit 1,000 additional officers and spend 75 million quid on the scheme. Now, that equates to the costs of a year spent sending migrants to Rwanda. Joining us now in the studio is Home and Security editor Mark White, who's across all the detail. And Mark, some people are saying this bears striking similarities to a scheme that's already in existence.
Yeah, well, look, I think 1,000 additional personnel, if that's what it turns out to be, £75 million of extra finance will certainly be welcome. But effectively, we're looking at a rebrand here of Small Boats Operational Command that was already rebranded and reorganised just a year and a half or so ago, when Rishi Sunak in December of 2022 stood up and told us that he wanted to bring together civilian agencies, the military and the National Crime Agency, with a key goal of going after the people smuggling gangs and dismantling them. Well, that is, of course, what Sir Keir Starmer wants to do. And as he was speaking in the Kent town of Deal, just further along the coast, a stark example of what he will be up against in trying to deal with the small boats. Another almost 200 Channel migrants were brought to Dover by a number of small boat Border Force vessels. In fact, one Border Force vessel arrived in Dover just as he was giving his speech with 113 migrants on board. So it is a very difficult task that any Labour government coming in, if they do win the next election, will have to deal with, and a rebrand of the way in which the organisational structures are in place to deal with those boats and investigate the criminal gangs is probably not going to cut it on its own.
It's so fascinating to see that this is a field on which the Labour Party feel like they can make promises. Most voters, I would suggest, sort of see the Labour Party as a high migration party, as a party that is perhaps less committed to tackling illegal migration than the Conservatives or parties of the right. I suppose it's only that we've seen such high numbers crossing the English Channel that the Labour Party feels like they've got space now to try and come at the UK government on this. But doesn't this sort of obscure one of the wider problems? If we zoom out from just the English Channel, we've also seen unprecedented movement of people from Africa into the European continent. You yourself have been to Lampedusa, which has seen numbers that we couldn't even imagine coming across. This is a global problem.
Yes, I mean, it's evident, I think, in some of the language that Sir Keir Starmer was using in his speech as well, in describing the migrant camps on the other side of the Channel as refugee camps, and talking about the poor refugees there and the conditions that they had to live in, almost absolving them of any blame for the situation they find themselves in. These are not just passive participants. They are people who have actively sought out criminal gangs to pay them thousands of pounds to take them on that dangerous journey from, yes, across the Mediterranean, as you mentioned there, Tom, into places like Lampedusa, into Greece, into Spain, or on the Balkans route, all with the aim of, most of them at least, heading up to more prosperous nations in Northern Europe, and many of them, of course, to the beaches of northern France with a view to getting across the English Channel. But clearly, Sir Keir Starmer realises it is an issue that many people in this country are very concerned about. He knows that a Labour government is going to have to deal with it. But I think, very interestingly, in the speech that he gave, one clear area of difference between Labour and the Conservatives is on Rwanda, and Labour absolutely confirming that they will scrap the Rwanda policy if they get into power. But But that throws up a big question for Sir Keir Starmer's government, should they get into power, about what they do with the many, many thousands of people who cross the Channel but who come from countries that, even if their asylum claims are turned down, they just can't be returned to.
Mark, I thought the Labour Party wanted to get closer to the European Union in terms of collaborating on policy. And yet the European Union is now looking to do deals with African countries. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has mentioned Tunisia and Egypt to do these investment and migration partnerships, much in a similar vein to the investment and migration partnership the UK has with Rwanda. It would be remarkable for Keir Starmer to be elected Prime Minister in this country and abandon Rwanda, just as the EU is making its own Rwanda-style deals.
Well, it certainly looks like an issue of potential contradiction going forward. And as you mentioned there, countries like Italy, for instance, already doing deals with Albania with a view to taking migrants as a third-party nation. So clearly it's something that Europe, or many countries within Europe, are now able or willing to explore, at least, as a possible way of dealing with what is a growing crisis. Many, many millions more people in the years ahead, we're told, will be on the move from parts of the world for whatever reason, climate change, poverty, dysfunctional governments, heading to Western nations looking for sanctuary in nations that have more prosperity.
Yeah, it's a growing problem that I can't think of a single developed country that's not facing these increased demands. But Mark White, as ever, thank you very much for taking us through the detail here on what is a comprehensive subject. But let's cross now to France. Of course, it's a country that borders the United Kingdom, at least by that maritime border, and it's been having problems with regard to its birth rate. Yes, this is, of course, an issue that the President of France wants to deal with. Here's how ITV News reported a new initiative. The French President is stepping in after the country's birth rate hit its lowest point since World War II. The French President is stepping in. My goodness me, he'll have to be busy if he wants to personally up the birth rate. Has he taken a leaf out of Boris Johnson's book there, perhaps? Well, that reporting from ITV has led to much mirth online. But moving on from how policy might address falling birth rates, or indeed how individuals may, let's cross to Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. They're in Nigeria as part of a 3-day visit on invitation of the country's Chief of Defence Staff. The couple will also attend a training session for charity organisation Nigeria Unconquered, which collaborates with the Invictus Games, as well as a reception where military families will be honoured. Well, joining me now is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker to take us all through it. And Cameron, they're stressing that this is not a royal visit.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. And I think if you've been in the coma for the last 4 years and woke up and saw all this coverage around Harry and Meghan in Nigeria on the royal tour that isn't a royal tour, you would be forgiven if you're mistaken into thinking that the two of them were still working members of the royal family. But of course they are not. But what we're seeing is these kind of visits, a 3-day visit to Nigeria, playing out very much like a royal tour. They were invited by the Nigerian government because their defence unit is very keen for the Invictus Games. That's Prince Harry's foundation to support wounded veterans and their recovery through sports, to host the Invictus Games in the next couple of years. So they're kind of showcasing all the facilities they've got and how they're supporting service personnel in Nigeria. But also, on the other hand, it's to do with Meghan and her heritage. She revealed on her Archetypes podcast that her heritage includes 43% Nigerian. So the pictures you're seeing on your screen now, for those watching on radio, watching on television even, is Harry and Meghan at a school, the Lightway Academy in Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. They're hosting a mental health summit, and this is what Meghan told some of the students there.
To have our first visit to Nigeria, be here with all of you. We believe in you, we believe in your futures, We believe in your ability to continue to tell your stories and to just be honest with each other. There is no need to suffer in silence.
Yeah, no need to suffer in silence, says Meghan. There's a number of other engagements going on, but the royal eyebrows may be raised here. The reason being is that Harry and Meghan are no longer working members of the royal family. Nigeria is a Commonwealth nation. King Charles is head of the Commonwealth, and him as head of the Commonwealth has not had a chance to visit Nigeria yet. And in the days gone by, Harry and Meghan would have been officially representing the king on a visit such as this, and therefore shoring up relationships between the Crown and the Commonwealth, but that's not happening. They're going alone. Harry did not even see his father when he was in the UK earlier this week. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that Prince William's engagements in the Isle of Scilly, supporting local businesses as they gear up towards the summer months, is being completely overshadowed by this as well. But of course, Harry and Meghan completely entitled to do this. They are ordinary citizens. They've been invited by the Nigerian government, and they have accepted that invitation. And it appears so far it's going quite successfully, but the elephant in the room is the relationship between Harry and Meghan and the rest of the royal family, and of course their popularity with the British public, which at the moment is not very good.
No, perhaps one of the reasons they prefer to be in other countries is that their popularity might be slightly higher. Although it's interesting that the government issued this invitation, sort of almost treating them as dignitaries rather than private citizens. And curious too, those words, that no one should suffer in silence. Do you think there might be a hidden message there? It's far removed from the old adage, never complain, never explain.
Well, quite possibly. We've seen hints, I think, from Prince Harry over the years that he wants to be far more open about his mental health, very similar to Prince William, his brother, actually, as part of the Royal Foundation with the Prince and Princess of Wales. Those three of them, William, Catherine and Harry, really championed breaking down the stigma when it comes to mental health with their campaign Heads Together. But, of course, Meghan came along, they married, and then they, of course, split, and they've had a bit of falling out ever since. But Harry's been very open about his mental health in his memoir, Spare. I think this is just going on the same theme. But the wider point and the wider context here is that Harry and Meghan appear to be championing causes they care about at the moment and getting away from this victim narrative that they've been kind of pursuing over the last few years with Harry's memoir Spare, with the Netflix series documenting their exit from the royal family, two big things which did really dent their popularity. So is this a sign that Harry and Meghan want to turn things around now, build up trust with the British public, build up popularity with the British public, and perhaps try and start to mend relationships with the King and Prince William?
Really interesting stuff there. Cameron Walker, thank you very much for taking us all through it. Now, coming up, 45-year-old Lee Beyer is to be sentenced today after having admitted the manslaughter by diminished responsibility of 86-year-old Thomas Halloran, who died after being stabbed whilst riding a mobility scooter back in August 2022. Well, after the break, we'll be speaking to the former MP for the constituency where the attack happened. What a curious case this is. Much more after this.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Rishi Sunak has come out fighting and declared war on what he's called the UK's sick note culture. The country's welfare state bill costs the average taxpayer now £2,000 every single year for every British taxpayer. Astonishing numbers, Catherine, simply mind-bending. 69 billion quid every year now goes on benefits. I paid my tax bill last month. Where did your tax go? I clicked on it. Long-term sickness and benefits is now second only to the NHS on what we spend our tax pound on. This is simply unsustainable.
That's exactly what the Prime Minister said. 69 billion a year on long-term sick and disability benefits, projected to rise to 90 billion by the end of the next Parliament if nothing has done. As he said, it is totally, totally unsustainable. And the message from Rishi Sunak really is, tough love. You're going to take your medicine. It's going to be good for you. You may not like it. Let's have a look at what he had to say earlier.
Everyone with the potential should be supported. And not just to earn, but to contribute and belong. And we must never tolerate barriers that hold people back from making their contribution and from sharing in that sense of self-worth that comes from feeling part of being something bigger than ourselves. And that is why this is a moral mission, and why the value of work is so central to my vision for welfare reform.
Certainly, Rishi Sunak said in the speech, in the period since the pandemic, something has gone wrong. Of course, millions of people had their wages paid by furlough. Now, that was an entirely artificial situation in an exceptional circumstance, but quite a lot of people left the workplace and simply haven't come back.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 2. Now, Lee Byer, 45 years old, of Southall, West London, is to be sentenced today after having admitted the manslaughter of this man, Thomas O'Halloran. Now, he's admitted manslaughter by diminished responsibility after Thomas O'Halloran was stabbed to death. He was 87 years old. He was stabbed while riding his mobility scooter back in August 2022. And he was managed to travel around 75 yards on his mobility scooter. He flagged down a member of the public for help, but it was all too late. Now, the attack took place in Greenford in West London, which lies in the Ealing North constituency. The former MP for the area is Stephen Pound, who joins us now. Stephen, Thomas O'Halloran was a pillar of the community.
Yeah, you couldn't miss him. He's an absolute character. He was originally from the west of Ireland, and he'd sit on his mobility scooter playing the accordion, particularly outside the Super Chef Cafe, up where the Greenford Road comes into Ruislip Road. You couldn't miss him because he was a real character. He also had 2 or 3 different names because people knew him in different worlds, and so they'd often call him by different nicknames. But I think what's particularly brutal and cruel about this is that Thomas, he was actually collecting money for Ukrainian refugees at the time he was killed by Welland Gardeners in Greenford. And that was him all over. Sometimes, you used to get a bit tired of hearing the same old music over and over again. But on the other hand, it's one of these people, you really do miss him when he's gone. And a lot of people do miss him. And people still say, what happened to the man on the mobility scooter? Well, you have to say he was killed by somebody who was, well, demonstrably a wrong-un. I mean, whether diminished capacity, diminished responsibility is an excuse or not, I don't know. But I know that Thomas's family, his son, his daughter, and the rest of the family will be looking with some trepidation to see what that happens at the Old Bailey today, because nothing's going to bring him back. But on the other hand, I think this exposes one of the real problems we have with the criminal justice system in this country, that very often people in prison are mad, bad or sad. Whether this person was which one of those, I don't know. He could be bad, he simply could be sad. But the fact remains, he needed mental health treatment, and he should not have been wandering the streets of Greenford. He should not have been by the side of the A40. He should not have been in this crowded part of the world. And had he been in secure accommodation, which, I'm not a doctor, but I have the feeling that that's where he should have been, then this man, who you quite rightly describe as a pillar of the community, a community champion on his sort of mobility throne as he sat there in splendour outside the Super Chef Cafe. God rest his soul, he was a decent man.
I think a lot of people will hear the introduction to this story, and we should be a little bit careful because the sentencing hasn't happened yet, but they'll hear the introduction that this person who has admitted guilt manslaughter by diminished responsibility, people will be thinking of another case that it reminds them of, that of Valdo Calocane, who, of course, committed those Nottingham stabbings. Now, he claimed manslaughter by diminished responsibility in the stabbing that killed those 3 people. This seems to be more and more common in our justice system.
Well, it does. I'm not entirely sure, Tom, that we actually got a justice system here, because it doesn't look to me like a system, and it certainly doesn't look like justice to me. I mean, one of the problems we've got is that very few people in government do anything about prisons until there's a riot or there's some horrendous situation as these ones we're talking about. I mean, years ago, I was sent undercover with another MP into Dartmoor Prison, and we worked as prison officers for about a month or so. And we know, as far as the rest of the officers knew, we were prison officers. As far as the I think we used to call them inmates, but they were called service users nowadays. They thought we were just prison officers. And it came to me very quickly that the prison staff then, 20-odd years ago, were mostly ex-service people who had been in the job a long time, had an institutional memory, and had a way of dealing with the problems very, very quickly and identifying them. What happened is that the prison officers, prison service, got rid of all those people who'd been there for a long time because they were earning too much and their pensions were too big. We outsourced the prisons. We've now got private prisons being run. And I often think that if a country isn't fit to actually imprison and look after its own prisoners, we outsource that. There's something seriously, seriously wrong. I mean, today we've got best part of 95,000 people in prisons in the United Kingdom, 95,000. And when you think that there's, less than 30,000 in the entire Royal Navy, those 95,000 people, some of them, in all honesty, Tom, you've been around, you've got your finger on the because you know what goes on. A lot of those people simply should not be in prison, but more than that, they should not be roaming the streets. We've got to build more Broadmoors, more secure accommodation, because there are certain people, for the sake of all of us, not just for the sake of Thomas O'Halloran and his family, but for you, me, our families, all of us, we cannot have these people wandering the streets, slaughtering at will, when, in all honesty, they should be behind bars. And whether it's behind a prison hospital or a prison, I don't really care. I just want them off the streets.
And Stephen, in so many cases, what is so frustrating about cases like these, and let's zoom out and talk about some other cases as well now, because in so many cases in general around the country, you see someone has been to prison, has been released, perhaps early release, only serving half their sentence behind bars, only to go on and commit similar terrible crimes all over again. It seems that we have a very small proportion of people just going round and round in circles through the criminal justice system, and they're released and they commit crimes again. So often this is the case. Are we just releasing people too often? Are there some people where life should simply mean life?
Well, I think the situation, there's two different issues here. One is the parole board, where you have prisoners who are sentenced to life imprisonment, but it is, unlike in America, there's a thing called LWOP, which is life without the opportunity of parole. That means that does mean life is life, and you're in one of these sort of cellars under the desert in Nevada, and you ain't never going to, it's where the sunlight comes in stripes for the rest of your life. So that's a slightly different issue. The point that you've quite rightly mentioned, and not for the first time, is that because our prisons are so vastly overcrowded, they're sort of, rat-filled drug havens, that there are people who are being released. And today we heard that this even large number of prisoners are being released onto the streets. Now, when you say released onto the streets, this is not like, you imagine it's like releasing some animal into the wild. When you release people onto the streets from prison, you get a rail warrant and a few bob in your pocket. You get your personal possessions in a black plastic bag, a bin liner, and you're there. You don't get the aftercare in this country, or if you do, it's in a tiny number of cases. And why? Two problems. One is, building more prisons is incredibly unpopular. People don't want a prison at the end of their garden. Equally, they don't want a halfway house or a secure accommodation or anywhere, which I actually think works for prisoners. I think when somebody's been in prison and they come out, what we want to do is to integrate them into society, get them working and get them earning and get them back online. To do that, when you're just emerging, blinking into the daylight as you come out of the Villa or the Scrubs, you haven't got much chance. Because, if, to be honest, your first opportunity you're going to get is to probably take some drugs, because that's what you've been taking in prison. So aftercare is an important thing. And
Stephen Pound, I have to say, I used to believe in what was known as the rehabilitation revolution when Michael Gove was Justice Secretary, and he tried to do a lot of this stuff. I have to say, I think my mind has changed on quite a bit of this. I think there are some people who are literally unredeemable in society who do need a much longer time behind bars, perhaps never to be released if they have committed bad crimes. We have run to our advert break, but Stephen Pound, really appreciate your thoughts, particularly on this case in your former constituency, but also gbnews.com/your say if you've got thoughts on all of the above. Now, coming up, we're going to be live at a demonstration in support of Jeremy Bamber. Now, he's serving a whole life sentence after being convicted for murdering his parents, his sister and her twin boys in the infamous White House farm murders of 1985. But before we get to that and that extraordinary protest, here's your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Tom. It's 2:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Rwanda asylum policy will end under Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer describing the scheme as an absolute waste of money. The party leader, who's in Kent, says he wants to create a border security command to tackle the small boat crisis. Sir Keir unveiled proposals for stronger new counter-terror powers that will effectively treat people smugglers like terrorists. Labour says it'll spend £75 million on the plan if it wins the election, the equivalent of what would have been spent sending migrants to Rwanda for a year.
Britain can do better. Labour will do better. We will end this farce. We will restore serious government to our borders, tackle this problem at source and replace the Rwanda policy permanently. And today we launch our plan to do that. A new approach to small boat crossings that will secure Britain's borders, prevent the exploitation by tackling it upstream and smash the criminal smuggling gangs.
The Prime Minister has defended the government's policies on net zero. Speaking at an event in Oxford, Rishi Sunak said the government is aiming to reach targets in a more pragmatic way. The Prime Minister acknowledged he'd received a lot of flack for his policies, but maintains it is the right move for the country. Meanwhile, the Magna Carta has been targeted by Just Stop Oil protesters. Two women, both in their 80s, smashed the glass protecting the historic document. Posting on social media, the group says the pair also glued their hands together while accusing the government of breaking climate laws. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fantastic Friday out there if you like warm and sunny weather. Just to note, UV levels are high across parts of the south. We haven't seen a lot of sunshine this spring. Don't get caught out. High pressure is dominating and will continue to control our weather, at least for the first part of the weekend. We do have a weather front clearing away from Shetland. Brought a bit of rain earlier and staying fairly cloudy here. Later on today, the mist and low cloud could return to parts of the coast in East Anglia, and some cloud bubbling up this afternoon over northern England. Very small chance of seeing a shower, but for the vast majority, dry, fine. Warm in the sunshine as well, widely over 20 degrees, 24, 25 degrees across the southeast, maybe even up to 26 Celsius. A fine evening to come. Again, for the vast majority, the cloud tending to, again, clear away from Shetland. But we'll see a bit more mist and low cloud returning to eastern counties of England, from Lincolnshire down through to Cambridgeshire, across to the London area and throughout East Anglia. Likely to start a bit grey tomorrow morning. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in urban areas, a little lower in the countryside. On to Saturday, and yes, it could start a bit drab over eastern counties of England, but that mist and low cloud will disappear. Just the threat of it sticking to some coasts. For most, it's another sunny day on Saturday, but a greater chance of seeing one or two showers break out north of the central belt across Scotland, maybe even a thunderstorm. Vast majority, though, dry, fine, warm and sunny again.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M90 northbound in Perth and Kinross at junction 12, the Broxton roundabout. Estimated travel time there around 20 minutes. Very slow for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands, heading up towards junction 8 of the M6. Estimated travel time there around 25 minutes. Slow for the M5 northbound in Gloucestershire. There's a lane closed there for a vehicle fire between junction 11, the Golden Valley bypass, and 10 for Cheltenham. Also slow for the M5 southbound in Somerset due to holiday traffic in the roadworks around junction 19 for Portishead. We're seeing slow traffic on the M1 northbound in Northamptonshire due to an earlier obstruction in the road just after junction 18 for Rugby. And queues in Hampshire on the M3 northbound as a lane blocked at junction 5 Hook for an accident. And slow in the roadworks on the M27 westbound at junction 5 Southampton Airport. And that's the latest traffic and travel.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Now, many of you will remember the White House farm murders in 1985. Well, a demonstration today in support of Jeremy Bamber, who's serving a whole life sentence after being convicted of murdering his parents, his sister and her twin boys in those infamous White House farm murders, is taking place today. Bamber has always professed his innocence, claiming his sister Sheila, who suffered from schizophrenia, committed the murders before turning the gun on herself. Well, let's cross now to Birmingham, where the demonstration is taking place, and speak to GB News West Midlands reporter Jack Carson. Jack, this is an incredibly contentious case.
It is, and of course rose to prominence once again a few years ago. You remember about the drama about, of course, the White House farm murders, and of course bringing that prominence to Jeremy Bamber's case once again. But as you were saying, he's always protested his innocence, and these people here protesting the Criminal Case Review Commission and their efforts, of course, that are reviewing the cases and the reviews that have been put to them about Jeremy Bamber's case themselves. So we've been hearing speeches today. The protest here started around 2 o'clock, and very much kind of going through the points of what the protesters here are saying is that there are unacceptable waiting times for the amount of time it takes for the commission to review evidence. Now, they say it takes around 85% of cases reviewed within a year, but Jeremy Bamber's most recent review, they say, has taken 3 years so far, and they're moving through the evidence too slowly. Other protesters here talk about other people and other what they say miscarriages of justice, saying that the likes of forensic work is not being commissioned by the commission, that there are, they say, unjust refusals to refer to the Court of Appeal. Of course, Bamber's case was so prominent in 1985 and of course the trial in 1986. He's still serving a life sentence, and I spoke to Emma Morris, who's the organiser of the protest here. She told me why they're out here today.
Well, we're here today because the CCRC are failing innocent people. You know, their reviews, there are inexcusable delays. Prisoners are waiting years and years and years to have their cases reviewed. The CCRC have the power to get disclosure of evidence. They don't do it. They refuse to obtain forensic reports. And this ultimately leads to prisoners spending years in prison that they shouldn't do, and the CCRC referring less than 2% of cases that they review back to the Court of Appeal, and that means they are failing innocent people.
Well, of course, there was an appeal to Bamber's sentence back in 2001, which in his conviction was upheld. But we did ask the Criminal Cases Review Commission for a response to the protest here today, and a spokesperson for them told us that the CCRC has received more than 31,000 applications in its 27-year history and made more than 830 referrals to the appellate courts. They say that we employ a range of staff from many backgrounds with skills and experience appropriate to do the difficult work that they do, and they say they're making partial evidence-based decisions. They do not make decisions on the basis of external pressure from anyone. And they repeat that knowledge that Mr. Bamber has made 3 applications to the CCRC. The first application to the Court of Appeal with his conviction being upheld. The second, the CCR say they feel they did not result in a referral, and Of course, third referral is now underway, and they will not comment, of course, as that case is still under review. But the protesters here very much making their voice heard and putting, of course, to the public and trying to put more into the public eye their campaign around Jeremy Bamber's and others' innocence.
Yeah, Jack, I have to say this makes you feel deeply uncomfortable. This guy was convicted in a court of law. He had his case heard again, and that was upheld. He's tried again and again with no new evidence being brought forward. It seems that a bunch of weirdos are obsessed with a serial killer, as is in so many cases. Well, at least that's my view. Jack, thank you so much for bringing us the thoughts of this strange protest in Birmingham today. It's a very curious case, but deeply, deeply newsworthy. Let's get some breaking news now, because the mastermind of an armed robbery that ended in a police officer being shot dead has been jailed for her murder. Today at Leeds Crown Court, Pirandita Khan has been jailed for life almost 20 years after PC Sharon Beshenevsky was killed while interrupting a raid at a travel agent's in Bradford in November 2005. Now, she and her colleague, PC Theresa Milburn, who were both unarmed, were shot at point-blank range by one of the three men who has just carried out the robbery as he emerged from the door of the business. Well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, looks at the background to the case.
A grainy CCTV video is all that charts the final few moments of Sharon Beshenevsky's life, as she's seen crossing the road with colleague Theresa Milburn, responding to the activation of a raid alarm at a Bradford travel agent's. Just seconds later, the officers are gunned down, shot by armed robbers fleeing the scene. Almost 2 decades on, the moment justice finally caught up with the ringleader behind that robbery and murder, as Pirandita Khan was taken into custody at a British police station after years on the run in Pakistan. Boarded up and derelict, the site of the robbery, Universal Express Travel Agents, has long since closed down. The only evidence of the horror here, a memorial stone to a fallen officer. Shot at point-blank range, Sharon Beshenevsky died here on the pavement. Theresa Milburn was rushed to hospital and survived. She would later testify that neither she nor PC Beshenevsky stood a chance, that the moment the gunmen saw them, they opened fire on the two unarmed officers. Pirandita Khan, the last of 7 men convicted for their part in the deadly raid, was its mastermind. Captured on CCTV 5 days before the robbery in November 2005, Khan was driven up from his home in London in this Audi for a reconnaissance trip to scope out the travel agents. He was the only one of the gang who had previous dealings with the business. Khan fled to Pakistan 2 months after the robbery, when he was finally captured, extradited and charged back in West Yorkshire. He denied any involvement in the robbery and murder. The gang, he said, were only meant to intimidate the owner of the business, who he claimed owed him money.
On the 18th day of November 2005, murdered Police Constable Sharon Beshenevsky.
Have you any reply to that charge? Do you wish to say anything?
I'm not murdering anybody.
Sharon and Theresa went to work on that day, back in November 2005, fully expected to come home to their families and friends. But due to the horrific actions of those individuals that have now been convicted for those offences, that wasn't the case.
In a safe house in Leeds, the robbers met the night before the raid. Later police searches of the property found clothing and other items belonging to the men. A workman renovating the house overheard the gang's celebrations as Khan told them the business kept up to £100,000 in its safe. Armed with a machine pistol and other weapons, they set out the next day to rob the travel agents. Khan travelled in one of 3 vehicles, waiting outside as 3 of the gang carried out the robbery. The owner's son managed to press the raid alarm that brought Sharon Beshenevsky and Theresa Milburn to the scene. West Yorkshire Police Federation Chair Craig Nichols, like so many other serving officers, can remember exactly where he was when he heard the news of the shooting. Almost 2 decades on, the tragedy is still deeply felt.
The memory will never go away, and we will never allow that memory to go away. Sharon's dedication to her communities and to the communities that she served within not only Bradford but also West Yorkshire will never be forgotten. West Yorkshire Police will never allow that, and neither will the West Yorkshire Police Federation and her colleagues and her friends.
Now the final member of the gang who ended the life of a dedicated officer has been jailed. And at 75 years old, there is little doubt Piran Ditta Khan will die behind bars. Mark White, GB News, Bradford.
Well, Piran Ditta Khan jailed. Now, we're going to be taking you live to Leeds Crown Court in just a moment because there is a statement outside this court that will be going, it's happening now.
We see a 75-year-old man sitting in the dock with health problems. What do you remember him as from 18.5 years ago?
Well, he is a violent individual. Yes, the reason why he's here at 75 years of age is on the basis that he decided to flee the country in order to try and make good his escape and avoid being held responsible and accountable for his part in what had taken place. And let's be absolutely clear, he is clearly the one person that was responsible for organising and planning this and making sure that those that went in there had firearms and loaded firearms in that case.
All these years on, how satisfying is it to perhaps have some closure on this investigation, even though you're not involved in it?
Yeah, after being involved in it from the very beginning and giving a personal commitment to Paul and his family and Teresa as well as to the late Chief Constable Colin Crampon, that we would ensure that all those responsible would be held to account. It's professionally pleasing for me, but more so I'm more concerned that Paul, their children, Lydia and Paul Jr., feel that, as they described in their closings, in their statements, their impact statements, that this is the end of a chapter. And it is the end of a chapter. However, they clearly will never ever forget Sharon, as West Yorkshire Police will never ever forget Sharon Beshanivsky and the ultimate price that she paid for doing her job.
You made a promise to...
Well, we were working very, very closely with the Foreign Commonwealth Office, other agencies involved in order to try and track him down. Yes, we brought one back from Somalia and ultimately Khan back from Pakistan. So not frustrating, but it's a case of you've just got to wait for the right time for these things to happen, and it's putting political pressure on that, so you're in the hands of other people at the end of the day.
You gave Paul Beshanivsky a promise the day that Sharon was killed, and here we are nearly 20 years later, and yeah, can you just explain how that feels for you, please?
It is satisfying for me. However, this isn't about me. This was a case of making sure that Paul and his family and all those other victims who were involved in this, whether it was Teresa or those who've been involved in the robbery, got justice for the pain and the suffering that they went through on that day. So yes, I am pleased, but it isn't about me, it's about those.
I guess he spent the rest of his 50s and the rest of his 60s in another country, and do you think that this punishment is a correct punishment for that?
Yes, I think the judge accurately summed things up. He ultimately set on his mind on being at 40 years, lesser time he spent waiting to be extradited and whilst on remand in the UK. So yes, I agree entirely with the judge's summing up, and he also had to take into account the previous sentences for murder for those who had actually been involved inside the robbery and the travel agents as well. Okay. Thank you much. Thank you.
Well, that was the news, and we've just been live outside Leeds Crown Court after Piran Ditta Khan has been jailed for life, almost 20 years after PC Sharon Beshanivsky was killed while interrupting a raid at a travel agent's in Bradford back in November 2005. He tried to escape justice for 2 decades, fleeing to Pakistan before what has happened today has taken place. Finally, justice after 2 long decades. The family of PC Sharon Beshanivsky will be no doubt pleased, but also bemused that it has taken this long
for justice finally to be done after this murderer was living in freedom for 20 years after his horrific crime. There'll be many people asking what failures of the international justice system and the domestic justice system led to this man's escape, led to the long, long delay in justice being brought. But finally, justice has been brought. A life sentence, a whole life sentence for Piran Ditta Khan, who is now likely to die in jail. He's, of course, 75 years old. And it teaches us that even though people might think that they've run away, that they've moved countries, that they've escaped their past, justice can catch up with you. Well, that's it from us today, but don't worry that Martin Daubney is up next. He joins me now. Martin, what's coming up on your show this afternoon?
Well, Tom, of course, we'll be picking up on that Sharon Beshinevsky case, an astonishing miscarriage of justice for so long. He was at large and now finally brought to justice. We'll, of course, be drilling into all the failures, as you just touched upon. We'll speak to police experts on that. And, of course, we'll also be looking to Sir Keir Starmer's clamp down on immigration. Is it all tough talking? I've got a raft of security experts who think this is just yet more posturing because, quite simply, we keep arresting the human traffickers. And, Tom, as you know, another one simply springs up to fill their shoes. As soon as we clamp down on one, we arrested one in Iraq this week. Tens of thousands he brought here. He was called the Scorpion, arrested looking like a golf pro. Very rich, manicured hands. These people living the life of Riley. And if we arrest one, another will surely fill their boots. Is the only way just to stop boats landing in the first place, not to launch these elite MI5-backed things. What do you reckon, Tom? I just don't reckon it's got teeth.
Yeah, Martin, I'm interested in this idea that everything can be stopped because it's only all of these vulnerable people who are being manipulated by evil gangs. Are we saying there's no agency from any of the people who are crossing the channel at all? Some of whom, of course, are legitimate migrants who are being... legitimate refugees who are being exploited. But I would suggest that perhaps the majority are perhaps after economic benefits rather than fleeing genuine persecution. And I wonder what it would all look like if we had similar rates of not granting asylum that many European countries do. I wonder if focusing solely on the issue as if everyone is being exploited and it's only the evil people smuggling gangs that are the wrong uns here, well, perhaps that is missing a rather large part of the picture. This huge economic migration that we're seeing not just across the Mediterranean, not just across North Africa and the Middle East and Europe, but also the American southern border as well. Well, Martin, looking forward to your show, of course, coming up in 10 seconds, I'm told now, so I'm going to shut up and say thank you very much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. See you Monday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Will the fine weather continue this weekend? Yes and no. For many, a sunny Saturday. On Sunday, though, we do need to watch out for some thunderstorms in the west. Across the extreme east, things turning a bit murky overnight, mist and low cloud spilling back in. But for many, it's a fine, warm evening leading into a dry night with lengthy clear spells. Shouldn't turn too chilly. Temperatures mostly holding up in double figures, certainly in towns and cities. Could be a bit of a drab start to Saturday across eastern counties of England, the mist and low cloud here, but that should be clearing soon after dawn, certainly by mid-morning, tending to disappear. The cloud will bubble up a little bit as we go through the day, parts of northern England, particularly across Scotland, and here come the afternoon, mostly to the north of the central belt, there's the likelihood of one or two scattered showers, could turn out to be quite heavy. Some mist and low cloud may plague eastern coasts, but for the vast majority, it's dry dry and sunny and maybe even a touch warmer than today. 25, 26 across the southeast. A little cooler around some coast, but for many still over 20 Celsius. Sunday does bring a change. Again, some misty conditions are along some eastern coast, particularly eastern Scotland. A few showers over the Highlands, and then further south, Wales and western England. Chance of some heavy thundery showers breaking out through the afternoon. Not everywhere catching them, but they could be pretty potent. Some heavy showers in the west of Northern Ireland as well. For many, though, another warm day. Plenty more sunshine across the east.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use